right. My name's Mark Sitzma. I'm a professor here at Portland State University, and I'm here to welcome you to this workshop. PSU is happy to host the workshop, and we're looking forward to a productive 2 days. PSU has a long history in aquatic invasive species. We've worked with Oregon Department of Agriculture for over 17 years on aquatic weed issues. 11 years ago, we wrote the State Aquatic Invasive Species Management Plan, and since then, we've worked with state and federal agencies in the region to implement the plan. Our work on fouling organisms includes work on ship fouling, done mostly by Ian Davidson in our lab, and on freshwater fouling by zebra and quagga mussels. So we're happy to have you here to talk about fouling. We have some brand new facilities. If anybody would like to see our facilities, we have a brand new wet lab for analysis of wet samples and a new aquaculture facility for growing marine organisms. So that's just in this building right next door, the Science and Research and Teaching Center. So if anybody would like to see our facilities, just let me know, or Robin Drawheim, and Robin's sitting right over there, and we can give you a quick tour. That would take 10 minutes if you'd like to see our facilities. My job here is just to welcome you, so I do welcome you. I hope you enjoy your stay on campus. It's a beautiful day, and hopefully the weather's going to hold so you can walk back and forth to the hotel without getting wet and to lunch without getting wet. If you have any questions about PSU or the facility or anything, just contact me or Robin, and we'll try and answer them for you. And again, so welcome. I'm going to introduce now Stephen Brandt, who's the director of Oregon Sea Grant, and he's going to give an overview of the workshop. Stephen.
Well, thanks, Mark. I would like to also give you my welcome to this meeting. This is amazing to get such a gathering of experts in such a short time. I also want to point out the funders for the program as shown by the symbols up on this first slide, and I really appreciate the funding, which came around very rapidly. It was only, was it 7 months or 7 weeks ago that the doc arrived? Some of us think it's 7 months just given the trail of emails. But it's amazing that this event, and the doc is shown there, the tsunami doc, it really was an event that triggered a wake-up call, I think. Many of us are well aware of the tsunami debris field that was heading west, and there was a tremendous amount of effort to inform the public and to get prepared for the tsunami debris. There was a lot of discussion about what that might bring, radiation, contaminants, and so forth, but I don't ever recall anyone mentioning invasive species. And I think when the doc arrival and the invasive species arrival was really a wake-up call. I think it could be called a surprise. And I think that that has triggered this meeting and has triggered probably one of the biggest threats that we might be facing with this tsunami debris field. It leads us to a lot of really unanswered questions. The questions such as, what should we do? What are the proper response protocols for invasive species? How do we get coordinated across the entire region on the western region? What are the real risks associated with this invasive attack, so to speak? What are the proper science protocols and science monitoring that can be done? Clearly, this is going to take really a system-wide or a systematic approach to this. And that's really the reason we're here, is to try and look at what we can do. I want to give some special thanks to the planning committee. Who are listed here. There's a lot of other people who were also instrumental in getting this workshop done. And I noticed Karen Braby wasn't listed on here. She should have been listed. There's a number of folks that made this happen. If you can imagine, this thing only happened 7 weeks ago. We got funding from about 5 or 6 different entities, got you all together on your busy schedules to get into this room and deal with this very important topic. So I really want to thank all of you for being able to take and set aside your time to come to this meeting. I think we really have gotten together a lot of experts in a lot of different fields in one room, and I think I'm really looking forward to a productive workshop. One of the, if we look at the what I would call the overarching objective of this workshop is written is shown here. It's really to improve the coordination and collaboration amongst resource managers, community members, scientists, and decision makers involved in response to the invasive organisms associated with the tsunami debris field. Some of the questions we might be dealing with is, what are the appropriate jurisdictional roles and responsibility? Who's supposed to do what when this happens? What are the risks associated with this, and how do we communicate that risk? What are the appropriate outreach and engagement kind of plans that need to be in place on a Western region-wide basis? And I'll keep saying the Western region is really how we need to deal with this, and it's not just the West Coast states, it includes Alaska, Hawaii, and so forth. It really is a Western issue. How do we deal with it from a Western regional perspective? What are some of the critical research needs associated with this different type of invasion? I think the invasion, as I think Jim will talk about, is a little bit unique in the sense that it is an event. One would think there'll be an endpoint to this flow of material here, and that, and how do we just deal with that in a way that's, how do we develop standard protocols and so forth? Now, this workshop is really designed to have group discussions and an interaction to really set the stage for what the future collaboration might be. I encourage you all to brainstorm on this. We're looking for ways that from all of you to try and come up with some sort of a plans, protocols, next steps forward that will really make a logical plan for us to deal with this issue. I think everything's on the table. I think you should really think about this. It will take the people in this room to implement whatever we come up with. So think broad, think big, and think about how we might deal with this issue. I hate to put it in these terms, but it is a really unique opportunity, I think. It's a threat, but it's also an opportunity for us to do something interesting, to do something innovative, to deal with an invasive species problem in a creative way, in a comprehensive, coordinated manner. The keys to the success of dealing with this issue, as well as with this workshop, is that we really need to take advantage of the regional expertise. We have regional expertise primarily in this room that deal with everything from state planners to invasive species ecology to the various agencies that one are dealing with. There's a lot of expertise in this room, and we need to look at it from what expertise can we take from the Western region, put together an integrated plan. It is going to take regional coordination and cooperation. It's going to take partnerships, and I think everyone in this room has a shared responsibility in dealing with this issue. So if we approach that in an open dialogue way, I think we can really have a successful workshop. So I think that is the last slide. Okay, so I want to thank everyone again for attending. I look forward to a productive workshop, and I think our next speaker is Peg Brady, who will give us some more information on the workshop and where we go from here. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing here. Thanks, everyone. My name is Peg Brady. I'm from NOAA, and I'm the co-chair to the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force, which many of you know. And I want to thank Stephen and Mark and Robin and all the folks noted on the planning team. This is, again, it's been a fast and furious endeavor, and as Stephen indicated, there are a number of folks behind the scenes, too, that made this happen. And I specifically want to acknowledge Leon Kamen, who's the director of the National Sea Grant Program, who was instrumental in providing a lot of the resources, particularly to help get many folks here. And I know it's a bit of a challenging time financially for many of the states and organizations as well as us. We at NOAA just got our final approval late Friday night, so nothing like getting right down to the bitter end here. As I mentioned, I'm the acting co-chair to the ANSTF. I'm also the liaison for Commerce and NOAA to the National Invasive Species Council. And I also want to put a footnote in that I was a former director of a state agency albeit it was the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but I have a sensitivity about the federal-state relationship, so I want to be sure that folks understand that we are trying to develop, in collaboration with many of the partners here, a document or a series of documents, depending on the recommendations, that's voluntary and adaptive and helps you do your job. This by no means is meant to be any federal insertion of authority or anything. And it's unfortunate we don't have a lot of resources, and we don't anticipate a lot of resources from federal coffers. But I think the trick of this whole endeavor has been to try to leverage a lot of our talent and our expertise, which we obviously have here for these two-day session. So I want to just talk a little bit about how we got here since the doc arrived. I think many of us in the aquatic invasives community had speculated that possibly the tsunami debris may present a challenge for us, but clearly the dock on Agate Beach was, as I would describe, a poster child for this particular situation and threat. So a series of calls happened rather quickly, and some of you participated in a teleconference call that we held on June 20th. And the idea at that point was, what are your needs in the region? And we heard from a number of folks from the 5 states, as well as from the province, I think was on that call, or actually I think it was Tom Theriault from Canada. And folks said, hey, we need to act quick. We need to bring together all the talent and expertise, not only from the aquatic invasives community, but from the NOAA, or I shouldn't say NOAA, from the Marine Debris Program, which you'll hear about from Nancy Wallace. At that point, those two networks, those two entities were not really interacting. And so really the challenge today is to bring the talents of both of those groups together to create something bigger than just the Marine Debris Program. We're trying to augment and assist the Marine Debris folks as they are responding to these various events through time, and bring the talent and expertise from this group. So simply what we're trying to do is build on those two fabulous networks. The ANS network is a strong network, particularly here in the West. And I really laud the Western Regional Panel for all its efforts to date. And I really want to make sure that we are not reinventing wheels. We're just taking the information and applying it in different ways, in an adaptive way, to help affect a future plan of action or response to help the Marine Debris Program as they are responding. So what we had done is, at that point, we sort of identified a date out in the future where we could try to meet. A lot of questions got solved, a lot of money issues got resolved, and here we are. But before that, we wanted to make sure that we were not starting with a blank slate. So 2 groups were formed, and thanks to Jean Lee, Wan-Ji Lee from the National Sea Grant Program, who's a Canals Fellow, and Susan Pascoe from NOAA, who chaired those 2 groups. We now have in front of you some documents. They are straw documents. Again, they're documents to start the conversation and hopefully build upon what those 2 groups have done. And you'll hear more about that a little bit later, about the formulation there. In addition, the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force website has loaded some basic information. Again, we wanted to try to get as much information out to the community as possible. That site, I've gotten some suggestions about modifying it, and I'm hoping we'll get more suggestions through this day-and-a-half session. So that is an opportunity to sort of archive or dedicate information and a way to access. There's clearly other, I know the states have a number of other sites which we've also tried to identify at this Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force site, but my hope is that we can build upon that. So the challenge today is to build upon these 2 networks and develop a response plan and a communication strategy, simply stated. And what we'll do now is we'll start with our first series of speakers. The morning is really dedicated to trying to raise the level of understanding both of what's happening on the marine debris front, the monitoring that's going on, and then a presentation by Jim Carlton, who will help us understand what this means as a threat to the Northwest and to actually beyond the Northwest. So, but before we do that, we have an excellent facilitator. We have Stephanie Kavanaugh here. Stephanie is a loan to us, again, a loaner from NOAA. She's done an excellent job in facilitating a number of very challenging forums that we had back at headquarters. And ironically, we were in the midst of an internal NOAA invasive species retreat when the doc arrived. So we were learning about it as we were all sort of examining our priorities and so forth. But I want to thank Stephanie for that effort, and she will give us some guidelines about how we're going to conduct ourselves over the next day and a half. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie first.
Good morning, everyone. Just a few quick things, and I wish we had time to do introductions around the room, but there are a lot of us, and we're crunched for time today. So I just encourage you to introduce yourself to your neighbor. We will be working in smaller groups later today, so you'll have the chance to get to know, hopefully, some new folks better in that situation. I just wanted to quickly go over with you how you're going to spend your time today. There were some short agendas out there on the registration table. I'm going to leave some longer ones out there on the registration table for you also that also have all of the meeting objectives and our suggested group norms on them. When I'm a participant at meetings, I'm often looking back to the objectives to answer the question, wait, why am I here and what am I supposed to be doing during this session? So I wanted to make sure you guys have that, and I'll put those at the registration table also. So, how are you going to spend your time today? Well, there's going to be a lot of presentations this morning. You can see that on the agenda, but there is time for questions and answers after all those presentations. So, whatever burning questions you have in your mind, we'll try to get answered for you from those presenters. After lunch, which is on your own, and you have many food carts to choose from right out there, which sounds great. After lunch, we are going to have some breakout groups, and there are some really great volunteer facilitators and note takers who are going to be guiding you through answering some specific questions about the framework document that Peg referenced. This workshop has come together really fast, and those people have really jumped right in to take the lead at guiding the group discussion, so go easy on them. I know that there's a lot of strong opinions about the subject matter we're talking about today, but let's just try to remember that everyone's input is of equal value, and that when we're making our point, we'll try to be as concise as possible because there's so many people here, and we definitely want everyone to get a chance to give their input. You'll notice in your breakout groups this afternoon that there will be a note taker taking notes on a laptop. They won't be attributing any specific comment to any specific person. They're just capturing the gist of the discussion and all the input that's going to go back to the draft of the framework document and make it better. And everyone saw that the restrooms, I'm sure, were right outside those doors. Some of those breakout groups this afternoon are going to happen in different buildings. So some of you might actually be moving from this room to do those breakout groups, and we'll go through the logistics of that a little bit later. Does anyone have any burning questions about the agenda or the process today? Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for coming. And I'm going to hand the reins over to Nancy Wallace now. To Peg to introduce Nancy. How's that?
I should have pointed out when we had that planning call back on June 20, we thought we were going to have an intimate group of about 15 or 20. So managing the size has been, and as I think the last count was 88. So just so you know, we were a bit startled by the reaction and very pleased, obviously, too. So, but let me introduce Nancy Wallace. You've probably seen Nancy on maybe the press testifying before Congress. She has been front and center for NOAA, and she's the director of the NOAA Marine Debris Program. She's had over 10 years of ocean planning policy experience and has also worked with other federal agencies. So I'm really pleased that she took the time to come here. It's, I know, an extraordinary effort to get here because I know her schedule is crazier than mine. So I appreciate the time and effort, and Nancy's going to give us an overview of what's been done since the tsunami. Thank you.
This is always the challenging part. Is that me?
There you are.
All right. Oh, wait, no. I think I got it. There we go. Oh, thank you. All right, well, let's see. Thank you very much. Thanks, Peg. And I just want to echo everyone's thanks who's spoken so far about how quickly this came together and the interest that everyone has. This is an extremely important topic. We've been dealing, with the response from the marine debris side for over a year now, but the invasive species piece, as Stephen said, was a bit of a surprise. And I'm just so impressed at this community and the expertise that is in this room to be able to come together so quickly to address this important issue. So thank you for having me, and thank you for the time that you've all taken to come together for the discussion today. What I'm going to do is give a little bit of just background and context about what our efforts have been to date from a NOAA perspective, but also a federal and all the work we've done with our state and local partners, just to set the stage, and then we'll be able to dive more deeply into the invasive species discussion. So just to give a little bit of background about who we are in our program, we're the NOAA Marine Debris Program. We're a fairly new program. We were established in 2005, and we were actually authorized by Congress December of 2006 by the Marine Debris Research, Prevention, and Reduction Act. I mentioned the date because we were actually only authorized for 5 years. So our authorization expired on December of 2011. So we're actually actively working to get reauthorized right now, so we'll be able to continue our efforts in these arenas. The vision of the program is that the ocean and coasts and our users are free from the impacts of marine debris. It's a lofty goal, but it's something that we are actively striving for every single day. The way that we go about trying to make that impact is through research. We do a lot of research on things like what the impacts of microplastics are, what are the impacts of derelict fishing gear. We're starting a big effort next year on the economic costs of marine debris. So really trying to tell the story comprehensively of what those impacts are. We're doing a lot of assessment, things like monitoring, trying to get baseline amounts of marine debris. We, of course, do lots of removal. Our hope is that one day we won't have to do removal because we've been so successful in our other activities. But right now we do give out grants every year to communities to go out and do local cleanups from accumulated debris. We do a lot in the way of prevention. One of our premier activities that we're very proud of is called Fishing for Energy, where we have bins around the country at different ports where fishermen can actually drop off their old gear, and then we work with our partners at Covanta Energy. They come and take the gear and incinerate it, and it's actually used for energy. So we try to make it very easy for people to not have to generate debris in the open ocean. And then we do a lot of outreach and education, because a lot of marine debris is the everyday litter that you see on the beaches, plastic water bottles, plastic bags, just trash, basically. So we try to get people to understand that it's up to everybody to just change their behavior, and that will have a large impact on marine debris. We do that through, you see a little otter there. We do things like art contests for kids and, different outreach and community events. Oh, I should also mention that we have a very small staff. We are a national program, and we have 12 people. So everything I just mentioned, plus all of the tsunami work, is being done with a pretty small crew. But we have coordinators that focus on Hawaii, Alaska, the West Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, Great Lakes, East Coast, and Caribbean, as well as our research team and then our outreach and education folks. So to get to why we're actually here today, talk about the tsunami that hit Japan, just to give a little bit of context for what happened. It was March 11th, 2011. There was a 9.0 magnitude earthquake off of the coast of Japan, which resulted in a tsunami. At its highest point, it was a 130-foot wave. It inundated over 217 square miles, at some points going 6 miles in. I think that's pretty remarkable when you really think about that. We've been dealing with this issue since it happened in the marine debris program, but one thing we always try to come back to is the understanding that this was a human tragedy. There were over close to 16,000 people have been confirmed dead and about 3,000 missing. And as much as we want to be prepared for the debris and we understand it's important, we also always try to recognize that this was really a tragedy for Japan and to not lose sight of that as we get into our discussions. This is a picture of some of the destruction. The government of Japan estimated that 25 million tons of debris was generated, but as you can see, a lot of this debris was still on land. And then, of course, there's been estimates that the government has put out from Japan that about 5 million tons of debris went into the water and that 70% of that sank right away. Now, these are just estimates. There's a lot of uncertainties around those estimates. We really, we use them because that's what we have, but we certainly don't think that those are necessarily completely accurate because of all the uncertainties about what type of debris there was, the volume, what sank, what floated. There's just a lot of unknowns, which is why we have to be prepared for all different scenarios. After the tsunami, you could actually see fields of debris for about a month. You could see these large debris fields from satellite. So NASA, our NESDIS office at NOAA, really worked to be able to track the debris for as long as they could. But after about a month, the debris spread out, dispersed, sank, and it was no longer visible by satellite. So what floats? It's a good question. This is a picture that a lot of folks have seen. It's been on a lot of different presentations and websites. But this gives an idea of what went into the water. You have things like fishing boats. You have buoys. You have styrofoam, lumber. Those are the things that we anticipate are going to be more likely to stay on top of the water. Heavier materials, cars, concrete, heavy materials were going to sink close to shore. The marine debris program at NOAA has been involved in 2 other disaster scenarios. One was after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, and then again in 2009 after the tsunami in American Samoa. What we found in both of those situations was that the debris really did sink close to shore. We didn't have a lot of floating debris. This is obviously a different situation. And also, what I noticed, I've looked at this picture, many times, and I just recently kind of caught those big styrofoam pieces. I don't know if you can see those up there, but that's what we've been seeing. I've seen pictures from the tribes in Alaska and also some big pieces of styrofoam in Washington that look extremely similar. So you can, not that we can necessarily say that piece was exactly back to Japan, but there certainly are similarities. So there's a lot of challenges associated with this event. The scope of the problem. This is unprecedented. As I mentioned, we worked on Katrina, we worked on the tsunami in American Samoa. What was different about that is we worked close to shore. The debris went into the water. We went and tried to address it there. In Katrina, it was a hazard to navigation, so we were able to do survey and mapping and removal. In American Samoa, the coral reefs were being impacted, so we could go in and get some funding, not very much actually, and be able to remove some of the debris. There's still a lot of debris there. But this was the first time we've really looked at trying to track a massive amount of debris across an ocean. And it's a big ocean. I think anybody who's spent some time on the water understands that this is a huge area. I'll show some models later, and the models actually show that where the debris could be now is in an area 3 times the size of the United States. So we're talking about a huge area to try to locate debris. As I mentioned, there's no accurate estimate of debris types or volume, so we're working with a lot of unknowns. We don't know what sank, what broke apart, what's still out there. And it's also very difficult to forecast where the debris is going to go. Winds, currents change. The ocean has a lot of dynamic features, so it's very hard to say exactly where and when that debris will show up. There's been a lot of misinformation about the debris. Initial reports I saw in the press of 100 million tons of debris coming towards the United States. We know that that is not true. In the beginning, there was a lot of fear about radiation. We've been able to really cull those with talking to a lot of experts and understanding the background that, between the timing, the half-life of the isotopes, the weathering, we just don't think that that's an issue. Also, all the testing that's been done to date has showed that no debris has showed any higher levels of radiation. We got calls in the early days asking if people should move, if they should sell their homes, because they thought there was actually a huge wave of debris coming towards the shore. Our initial thoughts, and it seems to have come to reality, is that the debris was going to come, but it was going to come a piece here, a piece there, maybe a big piece, maybe some small pieces, but it certainly was not going to be a tsunami of debris. There's also been an assumption that all debris that's washing ashore right now is from Japan. And that's certainly not the case. Our program wouldn't exist if that was the case. There is debris every single day. This is a problem all the time. It comes from all different places. These fly swatters here, you'll see, there was an article that came up in the press a couple months ago. These fly swatters with sports teams logos started showing up on the shores of Alaska. And everybody said, these must be from the tsunami. They were actually from a cargo ship that lost a piece of cargo, and we were able to trace that back. But the initial reports were, yep, tsunami debris. So that's been a challenge to try to get the right information out. So what have we been doing? So one of the big things we've been doing is trying to find the debris. I said it dispersed, it broke up. How do we find it in that big ocean? So we've been working with a lot of partners. We've been working with folks on the water, saying, look for the debris, let us know what you're seeing. We've reached out to fleets, to fishing vessels, research vessels, the shipping industry, actually working really closely with, there's a lot of recreational yacht racers that have been great partners, and these are the folks that are on the water and can see what's out there. So when they get reports, they report them back to us. And even no sightings of debris is actually really helpful too, to know where things are not. We've been working really closely with the Coast Guard. Coast Guard does enforcement and training as part of their regular mission, but now they're looking for debris as well. So whenever they see something, they let us know. We've worked with the Department of Transportation to put out maritime advisories for anyone out in the water to make sure that they're not running into anything in the debris and that they're looking for it. And then also with the FAA, notice to airmen to be able to say, if you see things when you're out flying, let us know. These are two pictures as well of debris that was specifically linked back to the tsunami. The first boat at the top was spotted by the U.S. Coast Guard August 1st of last year, and then the other was by a Russian vessel in September. So we were able, with those markings, to be able to say, yep, those did come from the tsunami, and both were actually removed. Another way that we're looking for debris is through satellite observations. As I mentioned, the debris field is no longer visible because we don't actually think there is a debris field. We've been working with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and the Department of Defense to look for high-resolution satellite imagery. We've done a lot of targeted areas for observation, and we've requested areas, it's about 400,000 square kilometers. I will say, I didn't know a whole lot about satellites before this event. I've learned a lot more since. I had the impression, and I think a lot of people do, that we can see anything from space because I watch movies. And you can see, in the movies, they can look down and see a license plate. Well, apparently that's not what happens, as I've learned. And the question we kept getting from Congress and the media is, why can't you see this stuff? There's a ghost ship that shows off of British Columbia. Why didn't you see it? And one of the experts in satellites told me and gave this analogy, which I thought was great. He said, imagine you go up to the top of your house and you throw off some grains of sand from the roof. Then you go back down. 3 days later, you go back up and you look for that sand through a straw. It's very, very difficult, and that was helpful for me, but to really understand what the issue was. And so we're continuing to look, we're continuing to work with those folks, but it's more of a challenge than we initially anticipated. We have done some testing. We actually went out to the North Shore of Oahu in some military space in Hawaii and put out debris out into the water. We tied it, so we were able to pull it back in. And we used unmanned aerial systems to try to see if that was a way to see the debris. That was very successful. And then we also had 6 passes of a satellite looking exactly for where we knew the debris was. Unfortunately, there was cloud cover, there was wave height, and so it wasn't a successful test, but it was good to know that even when we knew exactly where the debris was, it was still very difficult to see. But we're continuing to work with those agencies to see if we can come up with something better. Modeling has been another really big area. As I mentioned, this is kind of where we think the debris could be now. Initial models that you may have seen about a year ago that were generated by NOAA and the University of Hawaii used a method that forecasted where the debris could go. They were using historical climate data, wind, weather data, to be able to forecast that. About December of this year, of 2011, we started to get reports of debris actually washing ashore that didn't match what the models said was going to happen. So we took another look and said, let's try to figure out if we can improve the modeling. We actually repurposed oil spill trajectory models for marine debris, and we're able, because it had been so many months, we were able to use real-time data, so real current data, real ocean data, and wind data from the Navy to be able to forecast where the debris is now. So we can't forecast into the future because we only can use weather data. And as y'all know, you can only really forecast the weather about a week in advance. So right now, this is a picture, and I don't see the date on here, but we're able to say we think that the debris is here now. And then we're updating these models every 2 to 3 weeks and showing where the shifts are going. One of the other things that we were able to change about the model was looking at windage. What windage means, it's basically like a sail area. How high out of the water does an item sit? And the Coast Guard actually keeps a library for search and rescue purposes of different items and how fast they would move in the water and how much they would be affected by the wind. So we were able to incorporate that piece of data as well. And when we redid the models, we actually saw that the debris that sits high up in the water, like a buoy or styrofoam or a big ship, would actually be moving the quickest because it's being pushed by the wind, and that debris would have shown up around December, January of last year. So it actually, once we redid the models, it fit what we were seeing in reality. So the model components were, there were 8,000 particles that were simulated. We were able to put in that high and low windage, and this shows what I said, the debris where it is now. That big outer line really does show where we think most of the debris could be. It's a huge area, and we recognize that. And then the areas where those little T's are is really where we think the highest concentration of the low windage things, so things that would sit sort of halfway submerged or in the water would be. But the things about models to remember is that the model is showing what could happen. It's not a reality. It's not necessarily what is happening. It's just the best estimate that we can. And it's used for planning purposes. We're able to use satellite detection or look at different areas where we think the debris could be now. But it doesn't take up into things of how much is sinking, how much is still out there. So models are good for planning purposes, but they're not actual reality. We're also getting a lot of information from the public. So we've asked the public and people on the water or on shoreline to say, let us know if you see significant debris. This is debris that could be from the tsunami. That means it could have Japanese characters on it. It could be something out of the ordinary, especially on the West Coast. There's so many beachcombers, people who are out on their beaches every single day. They know what's normal and they know what's different. So we're asking folks to say, if you see something that's out of the ordinary, let us know. But not every plastic bottle or piece of debris that could have come from up the street. So far, we've gotten 794 official reports. Actually, that's of last week. I'm sure it's gone up. 10 are confirmed from the tsunami. We certainly think that there's more than 10 that are from the tsunami, but it's just difficult to definitively link things back. The email address, disasterdebris@noaa.gov, is used for us to help with our modeling, to log reported sightings, and to map the sightings. I'll show you a map. And it's to aid in information exchange. It's not a 24/7 response vehicle. No one is monitoring that every day. If we do get something about hazardous material or something that could be a safety threat, like a threat to navigation, we certainly do let the Coast Guard know. But it can be a delay of a day or two. The states have also put out hotlines, the 211 line in Oregon and then the 1855 Washington, WA Coast for Washington. It's an area where citizens can report what they're finding or if they have questions. And then just the pictures are some of the things that we've been able to say are either most likely from the tsunami or absolutely from the tsunami. That's a soccer ball in the middle that we were able to return back to the original owner in Japan, which was a great story. It was a young boy who actually lost everything, and they were able to trace back the soccer ball back to him in Japan, which was a great story. So this is what we're doing with the sightings. This is a very crowded map right now. This is what we call IRMA. It's the Environmental Response Management Application, and it's a lot of different layers. All of the yellow dots there are reports of debris that we've gotten over time since December of 2011. The red triangles, which are very tiny, are the confirmed reports. The squares are where we're looking for satellites, and then the stars are actually where we're doing monitoring. We have better, here, actually, this is just a snapshot of the Oregon coast you can see, and all of this information is up on our website. So if you're interested in seeing all the different states closer up, we have that. I mentioned this before, but one thing that we've been really focused on is marine debris is an everyday problem. This is a picture out in Hanauma Bay in Hawaii, one of absolutely beautiful place, but certainly somewhere that's not immune to debris. And this was before the tsunami. So how do we know what's tsunami debris and what's just actual debris that's out there? So we've done a lot of monitoring. We're starting to work with partners along the West Coast, Alaska, and Hawaii. We've developed marine debris shoreline protocols that we had previously to be able to start getting baseline amounts of debris in certain areas. So we've actually set up monitoring in all the different areas for 2 years. Most of the monitoring will be done on a monthly basis. Some places like Alaska, it's going to be more snapshot because it's just more difficult to get to. We have about 100 sites now, and the goal is about 15 more. And the way that we're doing that monitoring is working really closely with our sanctuary partners, our Park Service, Fish and Wildlife partners, and then local community groups and NGOs in each of these different areas. And then if anybody is interested, we can certainly get you the protocols because it's very easy for really anyone to do. And here's a snapshot of where the different monitoring is happening. We've also done contingency planning. One of the things that I've mentioned quite a lot through this presentation is the amount of unknowns. We don't know where, when, how much. So we're trying to develop plans with all of our state partners. These are really state-led plans that we're supporting to be able to say, let's think about these different scenarios and what we would do in all the scenarios. Who has responsibility, who has jurisdiction, who has resources, so that if debris comes ashore, we're able to respond quickly. Now, of course, there's things like the dock that's already shown up, and we recognize that, but we know this is a long-term problem, so if we can get these plans in place as soon, it's a long process. We would have liked to have had them done quicker. But we are able to kind of get the groups together. And so I think Washington is close to being finished with their plan. Oregon is very close. California is working on it. And then Alaska and Hawaii, we're leading a federal planning process where we're going to be able to hand that over to the states. Communications and outreach has been a huge piece. We've done hundreds of meetings all along the coast. We've done hundreds of media interviews, trying to keep our website up to date and our press engagement. Also developing things like the monitoring protocols or debris handling protocols, and there's a lot of online resources if anybody's interested to find out more information. Of course, we have the Interagency Marine Debris Coordinating Committee at the federal level, and of course, involvement from state and local agencies. I will also mention there has gotten a lot of attention at sort of the highest levels of the federal government. I know there's the White House is involved, Congress is involved, very heavily involved, and so this is certainly an issue that there is getting a lot of attention, and we're trying to make sure that everyone who needs to be involved is involved and sharing that information. We're also working very closely with the Japanese government. They've been helpful in terms of providing the estimates and providing, being able to go back to find people. If we found a boat or different items, they go and track them down and let us know. It's been a great working relationship. And then also with Canada in terms of sharing information and the modeling. So just to summarize, there's a lot of ongoing challenges with this. At-sea detection is very difficult for all of the reasons I've mentioned. We have to continue to prepare for the unknown because we don't necessarily know exactly what's going to happen with those contingency plannings. There's new challenges, as mentioned, invasive species, why we're here today. When something new happens, we have to be adaptable, flexible, nimble, and be able to address those issues as quickly as possible. Debris removal is a challenge. This is one of the things that is just not on the radar for a lot of folks. And so who's responsible has been a question a lot. Who is responsible for cleaning up the debris in the different areas? Where are the resources? NOAA just recently announced $250,000 in cooperative agreements to the 5 states, $50,000 per state. We recognize that's a very, very small drop in the bucket, but it's kind of what we could do, and we hope it's at least leveraging off of other efforts, but it continues to be something that we're really concerned about, finding those resources to assist the states with the removal, and then getting the message out, making sure that the correct information is out on the street. We're meeting with different folks, making sure that everybody's on the same page and working towards a common goal. And then I wrote, what's coming next? Because as my team will tell you, I keep saying, and they've said, stop saying this. I keep saying, I think we're over the hurdle. I think we're getting there. I think we've done everything we can do. And then something else happens. So I'm getting better at that, but also recognizing that we don't know what's next. Something big could happen tomorrow that then we would have to address. And with that, that is my presentation. And Stephanie or Peg, I don't know if we have time for questions.
We do. We certainly have plenty of time.
Okay.
Folks, if you have any questions for Nancy, that'd be great.
So I would just say, if folks have questions, you could stand so that Nancy could hear you. We don't have another wireless mic. And then, Nancy, if we could ask you the favor of repeating the question
Sure.
so it gets recorded.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes. Stephen?
Yeah, I'm just wondering how detailed your plans are. If you're doing a lot of monitoring for the marine debris out there, but what if you see something? Are there specific plans and you see a chunk of debris out there, towing it away someplace or just monitoring it or?
Sure. So the question was, what are the plans for when debris is sighted, I guess. Is that correct? Offshore. Okay. So that's a great question. So when we do get a report of something large offshore, there's been a couple of reports recently, and we work very closely with the Coast Guard because the Coast Guard really does have the authority for minimizing any threat to from a pollution threat, so oil or hazardous materials, and then also they are in charge of the safety to navigation. So we will report it to the Coast Guard, work closely with the Coast Guard. A lot of times they've been going out, sending helicopters out to investigate more closely, and then they'll make a decision. I think there was just a large drum that was found that they thought could have been hazardous material, and so they went out and towed it in. Other things, it's more of just saying, let's try to keep our eyes on it, make sure, put out a notice to the boating community to make sure folks are aware that that's out there so there's not an issue, and then really going on a case-by-case basis to determine if it should be brought in or if it should stay out there. And we really do leave that up to the Coast Guard in those situations because they do have the best expertise. Yes?
not only relative to invasive species, but about debris in general. And if this stuff just keeps coming and coming and coming, it almost sort of could have the potential to desensitize the public to it. So what is your estimate in terms of that duration to help us plan for messaging?
Sure. So the question was about the duration that we can expect the debris to come ashore in terms of trying to make sure that we're messaging it all correctly. So as I mentioned, it is difficult to forecast when we think the debris is going to come ashore. We certainly don't think that there is a solid debris field, so we think that there's going to be pieces showing up over the course of probably many years. We do think that those high windage items, the things that are sitting high up in the water, are most likely coming ashore now. There's certainly some currents and things that have changed over the summer, which could come back around in the winter, so it could be, in the winter we're seeing more. But at some point we're hoping to get through, that piece of it, but then in terms of what's going to happen with those items that are half submerged or totally submerged, we think that could be over, a couple of years. Things move slowly. They get caught up in the gyres out in the Pacific. So it's very, very hard to put an estimate on how long we are anticipating seeing this debris, and I am hesitant to do so just because once we say something, it tends to get legs. But I will say that we do need to be prepared for a significant length of time and try to be prepared for all of those different scenarios. And I agree, keeping the message out to the public to make sure that everybody's aware of what to do if they see debris, who to respond to, and also that there's nothing to be afraid of, though. We don't want to certainly have that sense of fear or alarm and just be very responsible about it. So it's a difficult question to answer, but one that we're working on. Okay, let's see if I can summarize that, that question. The idea that there is a difference between the tsunami debris and the everyday debris, and are there plans to be able to really have some of that monitoring over the long term for the everyday debris and kind of showing the difference? Let me see if I can answer the question. That might help with the way I phrased it. So from our perspective, from my personal perspective, is that to me, it doesn't really matter if it's tsunami debris or regular debris. Debris has the same impacts. There's been a lot of attention because of the tsunami debris, and especially for the invasive species workshop, there's much more of a concern about, is it coming from another country, what's attached to it? You know, those are certainly important, but from an actual just, what are the impacts of marine debris? Why do we care about this issue? For all the reasons of habitat destruction, wildlife harm, economic impacts, we need to be prepared for all of it. And so our monitoring protocols that we have put together, it's been an opportunity to get those in the hands of lots of people, get the monitoring happening all up and down the coast, and getting really good data. Now, whether it's tsunami debris or not, that's a question, but we're actually really excited about the idea of being able to have a robust data source and a robust analysis of where hotspots could be, where are we seeing seasonal changes, are we seeing an increase over these 2 years. I would love to be able to do this for 5 or 10 years and really get some robust data. So I think having more detailed protocols, as you mentioned, for volunteer groups, for citizens, I'm hoping that we can get to that. And as we evolve through this situation, become a little, just to be very honest, we've been a bit reactive. This has been an unprecedented situation, and the amount of attention has been remarkable. But as we kind of catch our breath, be able to look towards the future of where we might be able to get more information and where we might be able to leverage these opportunities, I hope we can do that. And so I'd love to work more with you and your group on being able to refine those. Oh boy.
Not to spill Jim's beans, but I think when we listen to Jim's presentation, we may find out that we have some opportunities of information from the invasive community or from the fouling community that may help identify where some of this is coming. So I think it's kind of an interesting opportunity to explore. Sir, back there,
So a suggestion, I'm very simple, Northwest region. I'm the policy specialist for tribal relations in the Northwest region. And I really appreciate how difficult it's been to assemble all this information so very, very quickly and put together these presentations. And it's a really good presentation. But as a suggestion, when we have slides that show outreach to states, local communities, we should put the tribal communities in there highlighted because they are pretty vulnerable. Maybe they're not a relatively small segment of the coast per se, but they're in some more isolated areas and more pristine areas, and there's a number of tribal communities that are right on the water. They're very worried. They don't know how to make connections on getting assistance if there is a large event. They encounter debris all the time, obviously, but what their concerns are is if something large occurs, what can they do how do we respond to really get assistance? And that would just sort of help reinforce to people that there are the tribal sovereigns out there that are really struggling with this also.
So, Gary, that's a great suggestion, and the comment was about making sure that we're putting in our presentations and also, of course, working with the tribes to be prepared, and we have. I think we need to continue to do a better job, but we've done a lot of public outreach to the tribes, especially in Washington and Alaska, and one of the things that we're trying to do is with those contingency plans, I call them the state contingency plans, but they absolutely incorporate the federal land as well as the tribal land, and that's very, very important to us to make sure that all of the coastline is covered with these plans. So great suggestion, and we'll make sure to do that in the future. Thanks.
yes, sir. No.
We have internal botanic sanctuary, and with the money that NOAA sent to the states, the states have complete freedom to spend it as they like, or there's some recommendations.
Liam, we work for the federal government. So the question was about the funding that's going to the states, and can they spend it as any way they like, or do they have to have some parameters around it? So yesterday was our big day. Yesterday was July 30th, and that was the day that all of the states had to have their proposals in. So we actually are doing They were given some guidelines. We're really hoping to do marine debris removal. We heard from the states. Actually, you know, I went out to Washington a couple weeks ago, to Seattle and out to Port Angeles, and I heard loud and clear from the state partners, we're concerned, we don't have the resources, how are we going to get this debris off of our shores? And so we went back and said, what can we do to help? And this is, you know, like I said, a small drop in the bucket, but it's what we could do. But the idea is really to use that funding to leverage other funding and to be able to use it really for that debris removal. Now, we know the dock in Oregon, I think it's over $80,000 is cost to remove it. So $50,000 each state is very small, but it could help with something like that. So, but the idea is that they have to put their proposals in. They're going through a merit review, as all of our, you know, financial assistance to any groups do in the federal government, and then we'll be awarding it based on that.
Yeah, Dorn Carlson, NOAA. Tsunami debris aside, how significant is invasive species as a marine debris issue?
Great question. The question is, tsunami debris aside, how significant is the issue of invasive species on marine debris? It's something that we definitely know is a problem. It actually is something that we focused on. We have a research strategy. The Marine Debris Program put together a 5-year research strategy this year, and one of the areas that we are hoping to learn more about is what the impacts of invasive species on marine debris are in an everyday world. It's just, there's a lot of unknowns. We know that it's a way that things can be transported across large distances. You look at, you know, plastic that's out in the ocean, it can survive for 30 years and it can move. You know, we have reports of debris showing up in pristine or such remote areas like out the Antarctic. And so we know that things can move in the water. And so it's something that we were concerned about. Actually, my research team said to me this week, they said, don't forget to ask the invasives experts if they want to help us with this. so I have a side agenda item to talk to you all about. But it is something that we're focused on. It's not the highest priority in our research strategy. There's other things that we're trying to get to first. But, and even, I should mention, we've talked to a lot of folks with the invasive species issue. There was a lot of debris that came from the tsunami, came from land. So we don't think that that's hopefully going to have as much of an impact. But the things that were sitting in water that were dislodged, certainly there is. And what else, you know, what other storms? There's storms all the time. It doesn't have to be a tsunami for things to get cut loose from different ports and move across the ocean.
Hi, I'm Jim Eggman. I'm with California CMAP, and you talk about your web email address, disaster debris.
Yes.
And I know in one of the draft reports, you talk about requesting people to send photographs and information to that website. And I have a question and concern about just what's done with it then.
Yep.
With what speed, because clearly the issue of invasive species control, which is what this workshop is supposed to be about, rapid response is critical in getting that information to the state and tribal officials that have the responsibility for dealing with it. I mean, that has to be done really fast.
Yes, so that's a great, the question is,
I gather it doesn't happen really fast.
right. No, so the question is the disaster debris at NOAA.gov email address. What happens to those reports? And that is actually, that is a perfect question, and I think that's hopefully what this workshop is going to come to. Our disaster debris at NOAA.gov email is a tracking information type email address. We try to report things, you know, within a day or two, but it's not monitored necessarily at night. It's not monitored over the weekend. It's not a response. We are not a response place. As I mentioned, we have a staff of 12, so it's very challenging. I think that's a great point, and I think that this group needs to determine what does need to happen with those reports and what is the best avenue for that reporting system. And our email address may not be that, and we understand that completely. So we're looking for this group to come together and say, what is the need? We have what we have. Do those meet? If not, let's think about something different. Great point.
Jim, just as a footnote, there have been other models explored to gather that information, but because this is such a well-established way of getting information, and we thought we'd start there and pose that to this group. So it's really your challenge over the next day and a half to see, given the limitations that Nancy talked about, given some of the other prospects, how can we come up with something that's sustainable?
And I think the answer isn't either or, it's probably both. We have to define what the other part of both is.
Right. No, I think that's something I'm hoping comes out of the workshop.
Just as a footnote, USGS database was the other thought that we are all familiar with aquatic invasives. But again,
Some folks over there.
I'm wondering if you could get us up to speed a little bit with what your thoughts have been about using the debris tracking app that as the University of Georgia developed for you, whether or not that's something that you considered for tsunami debris, and whether or not you think this group should sort of take into account the possibility of that app, because I know sharing app databases can be fairly easily done, and that might be something that you can utilize.
That's great. So the question is about the marine debris app. If you all don't have it, please feel free to download it on any iPhone or Droid. So the question was, could that be used for tsunami debris? We have actually had a lot of discussions about that. Just to give the group a little bit of background, the way the marine debris app was developed was through a grant that we gave out to the University of Georgia. And the idea behind it was really about education and outreach, trying to get people to be aware when they see debris, log it. You know, if people are logging it, hopefully that means they won't necessarily litter next time. Also some great citizen science that we can start to use. The issue with the app is that NOAA does not own the database because it's a grant. It's through the University of Georgia. So I don't think it's the best method to have folks do respond that way for tsunami debris, because it's actually much more of a lag time till we would get the information. You know, they use the information for great things in terms of outreach products and sharing information, but there's a delay in getting that to us. So we love the app, we would like to promote the app, but it really is an outreach and education tool, not a response tool.
Mark Floyd from OSU. What would you do if you saw another dock the same size floating 3 miles offshore?
Well, the question is, what would we do if we saw another dock floating offshore, 3 miles offshore? So I don't want to speak on behalf of the Coast Guard, because that is a Coast Guard responsibility. If we got the notice, if NOAA got the notice, we would give that to the Coast Guard. They are actually, we've had a lot of calls. I was on a call with the Coast Guard this morning about some detection issues. We've asked the Coast Guard, and they are completely on board with putting together sort of a protocol of what happens with all of their different reports they get, what is considered significant, what their different districts will do. We send everything to PAC area in California, because they're kind of the lead agency. Then the districts will all be on the same page, and they're developing a checklist for what happens when one of those reports come in. I assume if there's a report, I think that they would go check it out, see what it looks like. From a NOAA side, we do have our scientific support coordinators, which are part of our oil spill response, emergency response division, and those folks have been really involved in some of the debris when we do hear about these large pieces of debris, because then they start to develop near-shore modeling and to look at where the large debris could go. Is the trajectory, you know, getting closer to shore? Is it going offshore? And so we do provide that support and help the Coast Guard make those decisions.
That sounds mostly based on navigation decisions. What about the invasive species?
Well, it's difficult. You know, I think that's something that we should talk about here today, because it hasn't been a conversation that's really come up. I think something like a dock is something to consider. You know, other things may not have that. How do you get close enough to see if there's invasives? I think there's a lot of challenges that we should certainly talk about. And if there's recommendations that come out of here, we can work with the appropriate federal agencies to see if they're able to address it.
Not to put someone on the spot, but I know that there is there you go, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Heather, could you introduce yourself? I'm sorry.
Sorry. My name is Heather Parker. I'm a civilian. I work for the Coast Guard of Seattle, District 13. I'm their environmental scientist, and I work in the response, particularly oil spill hazardous chemicals program. Just to follow on, one of the things that makes this challenging is that the Coast Guard doesn't have our authorities and funding for issues regarding invasive species are very limited, specifically the things like ballast water. So for us as an agency, the concern over invasive species on a piece of debris is not necessarily a trigger for action. So we're still sorting that out. It's not to obviate anything you said, but that's not what we're mandated necessarily to do. We would track a piece without probably, but particularly as we get our assets out that are very expensive, our concerns over oil and hazmat or potential, some destruction and shipping. So we're certainly willing to talk more about that and sort that out.
Thanks,
Great.
Heather.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. We have a few more minutes. Gary.
Yeah, I'm Gary Freitag from Alaska Sea Grant, and I'm curious about elevating the level of priority for invasive species. I deal with marine debris off and on. I totally support that. I've had to remove potentially. But I see those as individual animals. I know we're impacting the resource, so we need to remove the debris. Invasive species, on the other hand, to me, has the potential of altering the entire ecosystem if the right thing. And I think it would be important that if we can get out of this group, what are the potential possibilities of altering the ecosystem that could affect our resources dramatically? If that message were to come out, if we had the resources, if we had the information to do it, would that elevate the invasive species piece, not only in Coast Guard, as you suggested, as in the debris program, as being more of a critical issue than say, individual impacts from debris, which, as I said, is really, individual animals and individual spots might get impacted from the debris. I'm just curious how you visualize whether it could be elevated to a higher level if the experts in this room that know something about it could identify the potential risk involved.
So the question was about how to elevate the priority of invasive species in the marine debris discussion. And I think that is exactly why this group of people is here today. You all are the experts. And so what I think would be great coming out of this is the idea of here is the risk, here's what we think could happen, and then of course where are the gaps? We just heard it's not Coast Guard's mission, it's not necessarily the Marine Debris Program's mission, it's not the mission, I should say, but it is the mission, I think, of a lot of you all in here. And so being able to really talk about where the authorities lie, where the responsibilities, the jurisdictions, the resources, all of those pieces, and then the risk, as you mentioned, can be huge. I mean, that's a huge, huge risk. And so being able to elevate that in the discussion is a priority. And so I am not an invasive species expert. I'll be the first to admit that. So I'm looking forward to learning more and then hopefully being able to take that back into the discussions that are happening at that higher level.
Excellent question, Gary. Okay, we have room for 2 more questions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see I see half a hand.
This isn't really a question.
Oh.
It's a comment.
I think. And it goes to what Gary said. I think a real important question is what marine debris circumstances should trigger an invasive species code red?
So the comment was, or the question to the group is, what invasive species situation would cause a code red?
Right.
All right.
Anyone else? I think there's been a lot of good suggestions and thoughts, so that's your thoughts going for the breakout group, because that's really where the work's going to be done. So Nancy, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I have to say, Nancy's team has just been fabulous. They do an extraordinary job, and they're working 24/7 on this one. And I also want to point out that Nancy mentioned that the marine debris authorization is overdue. I will also mention that the National Invasive Species Act is well overdue. 1996 was the last reauthorization, so now you know it's no big deal. So anyway, our next speaker, I think, can answer and at least make some suggestions to some of the questions that have been posed here. I don't think I have to introduce Jim. Many of you folks know Jim Carlton. He is the world expert in marine bioinvasions. He's the founder of the Biological Invasions Journal, is director of the Williams Mystic Maritime Studies Program, and has been a great friend, colleague, and just been working 24/8, as he describes, on this one, even during a research cruise over the last week or so. So I really want to thank Jim and for all the time and effort and the guidance especially. So thank you, Jim.
Good morning, everyone. And the previous speakers have referred to the hard work that was done in the last few weeks, and that is certainly the case, certainly 24/8. What I'd like to do is talk about some of the issues that have come up over the past few weeks. Far more unknowns than knowns, a lot of challenges that have gone directly to some of our paradigms and thoughts about how species move across oceans and how we understand that. One of the first things we heard and continue to hear on a regular basis is from folks along the Pacific Northwest coast is that I've seen floating Asian marine debris covered with marine life all my life on our beaches. Why is this different? So what about all that Asian marine debris covered with marine life long before tsunamis? What about ballast water? What about ship fouling? Ballast water and ship fouling have brought species from Japan for a long time. As Nancy just mentioned, there's a very important dichotomy that we start with, which is that there are two types of marine debris. There's TOD and MOD. Terrestrial origin debris, TOD, consists of things that have a land origin, whether they were tossed off a ship, a cruise ship in the Caribbean, whether they were washed into the sea or fell into the sea. Marine origin debris are materials that have been in the ocean for a long time and have been accumulating fouling communities, floats, piers, docks, and so on, vessels and buoys. The Japanese estimates for what went to sea was TOD. 99.93% of their estimate of what went to the sea were housing lumber and trees that fell into the ocean, and 7 ships. From 3 of the 13 prefectures that were washed over by the tsunami. The dock that came from Oregon was not in their estimates, nor was the prefecture from which it came. So we're very interested in MOD. Rarely are we interested in TOD. MOD brings us to about all that Asian marine debris, the Japanese glass floats that some of us have picked up, the Japanese milk cartons that you can pick up along the Pacific coast. Those are covered with pelagic biofouling, PBF. Very common is the barnacle lepus, the goose barnacle lepus, and other associated oceanic, so-called neustonic species. These are not invasive, these are native, these are natural, and these cover 99.99% of all of TOD. That's not our concern in general. TOD is not covered with Japanese biofouling, JBF, from harbors, ports, and estuaries. Why? We don't know. We're not sure. But for various reasons, typical marine origin debris that's been washing ashore since time immemorial, as long as we've been tracking it, does not appear to come from Japanese harbors, ports, and estuaries. At least we have never seen that before. Some of us have been exploring the beaches for more than 40 years, and there's been no MOD with Japanese biofouling on it. It seems to be extraordinarily rare. TOD, therefore, is covered by our friend lepus. What about ballast water and ship hull fouling? Here we could pause for a couple of hours and talk about a lot of details. The overall picture is that those rarely deliver to us large populations of adult communities, adult organisms with the potential for long coastal residency. Certainly not modern typical transoceanic vessels don't come with the kind of fouling that we saw on the Misawa dock, and it's extremely rare in ballast systems to find adult fouling communities. What about historic tsunamis in Japan? What about the last few, since the 1800s or early 1900s? Did those deliver this kind of debris field to North America? There were 3 in the last 100 and so years that are of interest to us. An 1896 tsunami, which was large, had wave heights the same as the 2011 tsunami, the 1933 tsunami with about the same wave heights. The question is, what was the scale of coastal infrastructure at that time? In 1896, I think we can presume that there was little in the way of infrastructure that would compare to 2011. Of course, the question is, what about 1933? Here we're going to look at the Aomori and Iwate prefectures in northern Honshu. In Misawa, in 1931, the airfield was a gravel runway on the beach. Misawa was not well developed. It's now a major airbase. In Iwate Prefecture, in Kamashi Harbor, we have photographs from the tsunami damage of 1933. If we look at these clearly are different than the similar photographs of the shore from 2011. There's not a lot of marine infrastructure left on the shore. This looks like largely the kinds of things that we associate with housing and lumber. Both Misawa and Kamishi were heavily hit by the 2011 tsunami. The present scenario paints the following picture: a combination of events that are unique, a rare natural disaster, interfacing with extensive 21st century infrastructure, which launched potentially large amounts of already biofoul debris into the ocean for residency on the other side. That combination, that sequence of events, seems to be without precedent, at least in modern times. As Nancy mentioned, predicting the fate of these materials is extremely hard. People who work on floating debris issues look at size, weight, density, windage, composition relative to floating, degradation. From a life sciences point of view, abundance, density, and diversity of the species, and very much the route taken. The Misawa dock is interesting to us because we do not know the route taken. We don't know how long it resided in coastal waters of Japan before it went on a sea journey, nor do we know if being an island confers survival advantages. Windage probably did confer a lot of advantage here and very likely moved this dock faster than we would have predicted. Why were we so surprised that a dock with living fouling organisms arrived? In part, of course, because of our previous experience. Because when we pick up all the Asian debris of glass floats and milk cartons, it never has species from Japanese harbors on it or other Asian harbors. So there are three reasons. We've assumed that coastal species in general die during a long ocean voyage, and there are good reasons to think that. There's very little food out there. It's an oligotrophic environment. The barnacle lepus is adapted to that environment. High ultraviolet B exposure often has a lethal effect. And there are other factors out there that make those oceanic pelagic communities extremely distinct from coastal communities. We can identify oceanic water just by holding up a quart of water and looking at the copepod population. It's very distinct from the copepods in neritic water. These are two different environments. That any species arrived alive was remarkable, the more so then that at least 88 JBF survived the voyage, work that Jessica Miller and John Chapman led down at Newport, involving a total of 20 taxonomists altogether from the United States, Canada, and Japan. And finally, that there were such a large number of high-profile species already known to us as invasives were on this one dock. Many of you have already seen this list. The sea star Asterias, shore crabs Hemigrapsis, the seaweed Undaria, the tubeworm Hydroides. These are examples of where they've invaded around the world. This dock arrived to us with already out there, all these species, of course, well-known predators and competitors, where they've invaded, high-profile invaders. And this dock arrived already with a number of species where there were wanted posters already. Whether it was Asterias, Undaria, Hemigrapsis, Caprella, or other species, already on our radar around the world. At this point, why do we need to know what's on the debris? Why not just destroy it if we see that there's non-lepus species? We certainly are being asked a lot about predicting what the impacts might be, so we should know what the species are, species of obvious concern, although I'll talk about this in just a moment, about the species that are not of obvious concern. To baseline what's arriving, should an invasion occur, to determine if selected species are viable, capable of reproducing, it would be good to know something about the capability of these species, that before we actually destroy them, they can be maintained in the laboratory. There are extensive protocols for maintaining non-native species in laboratory conditions. Some of our colleagues in this room worked on those for zebra mussels 20 years ago. This is a well-developed aspect of quarantine. And of course, to gather genetic baseline data to match against any possible future invasions should we get these invasions linking up to that second point. That said, it's not clear that we have the taxonomic resources and certainly not the funding to support the identification of what could be many hundreds of species arriving. 88 species on one sampling platform would suggest that we're not anywhere near the asymptote for recognizing what's inbound. Taxonomists so far have worked pro bono on this, but any large amount of work would have to be funded in some way. What are concerns about what are called AIS, NIS, and lots of other acronyms, aquatic marine invasive species? Fundamentally, although there are lots of unique things that challenge us in every kind of communication scenario about Japanese tsunami marine debris, JTMD, fundamentally they are the same issues that we have been dealing with for many, many years. For the past quarter century, we've been trying to inform the public, the media, the press, the political world, and many others about issues, why to be concerned about zebra mussels or New Zealand mud snails or Chinese mitten crabs, and a staggering number of other invasions in the marine environment, in freshwater and on land. They often come down to a number of fairly basic messages for which there is abundant data to support these. Potential for severe economic impact on resources of interest to us, other cultural and societal impacts, human diseases and toxicity, and a very, very long checklist of the potential impact on the environment. Huge amounts of material are already available on these issues, and we recently calculated that invasions in general, exploring many of these topics, have occupied nearly 90 books in the past 10 years, generating 40,000 pages of text. On the JTMD, we just saw there are well-known invaders, and then there are species not known as invaders, remembering that all those over here in the other column weren't known as invaders either. So none of these in Japan were species of note. They rarely are in their native areas. And so although there is temptation to focus on high profiles, a really critical aspect of our work is that, as we've learned again and again over many decades, any inbound species has the potential to be successfully introduced and may become what is generally called invasive. Northern Honshu presents particular challenges for where a great deal of this material is coming from. Several of the species on the Misawa dock are not known from the area of Misawa. Some of them are known from south of Honshu. When we were doing our ballast water work in Oregon, we found a number of species in the ballast water coming from Japan, no other source, which were not known from Japan. So there are challenges with the inbound biota, both at a descriptive level, a level at which we can look back into the Japanese literature. There are other kinds of issues that are going to come up in the conference, one of which, and has been discussed informally among emails, is that we do know that there are apparently live oysters coming in on other debris, and we're very much interested in the parasites and diseases of those oysters, what they hold, and species, pathogens, and parasites, endoparasites that might not already be present in the commercial oyster industries of the Pacific Northwest, one of the largest in North America. So here's the overall picture. Our first choice is it JTMD or not? And how do we know? We've already heard a little bit about that. There are clear identifying marks. I'm from Misawa. That helps. There's other evidence as well, cultural perhaps, but I suspect that a lot of those items that we're not sure about yet could be identified by Japanese biofouling. There are a number of species that only occur in Japan, and if they're on the debris, that's where the debris came from, and it was associated with a tsunami. So we get down to sorting out the first two pieces, focusing quickly on the JTMD, and the next question is it a soccer ball or not? If it's a soccer ball, we're not concerned. It's going to have gooseneck barnacles on it, and we move on to Maud versus Todd. There is the chance that some terrestrial origin debris from the tsunami resided in Japanese coastal waters long enough to acquire some Japanese coastal organisms. That's not impossible. We haven't seen that yet, not that combination of confirmed debris with Todd. But Maud is overwhelmingly the issue. The next choice is, does it have pelagic biofouling on it, PBF, or does it have living Japanese biofouling species? We quickly get down, notice the arrows are getting smaller, we quickly get down to a small subset of what we're concerned about. Another way to look at it would be to go from marine debris to JTMD to MOD to JBF. The challenge is we don't have numbers associated with these fields. It's really hard, as Nancy said, to make any robust estimates at this time as to what we're looking at and certainly where it is. The other issue is what's the probability of landing and where? And what are we looking at there is a series of equally important unknowns. A lot of debris could land on a high energy shore where it would get crushed, beaten to death by wave action, ground up in the surf in some way. It could come into a cove on the outer coast of Vancouver Island. It would take a long time to figure that out. A lot of the mussels that might have come off the Misawa dock may have been eaten by crabs in shallow water right off Agate Beach. We don't know. But there is the possibility that even landing on a high-energy shore could mean that there is some survival of some sort. There could be dislodgement and drifting away, reproducing. Another possibility is that debris could float directly into an estuary or harbor. In some areas, this is an incredibly small target. I don't know what the percent of the coastline in Oregon that presents as an estuary opening would be compared to the entire Oregon coast. Small, getting small on that. Little tiny windows to hit, a difficult mark to hit, but not impossible. We know drift bottles that are launched at sea end up inside harbors. So it's not impossible to do that. In other areas, like the Puget Sound area, the target might be a lot broader. Finally, secondary transport. And secondary transport is an issue. It's often inadvertent, it's often accidental, it can be intentional, it can have to do with the public arena, management arena, and scientific activities. We're becoming more and more aware of the potential for any of these activities to actually move species, as I said, largely inadvertently and accidentally. And of course, there's always the possibility, which is something we'd have a hard time really grasping, as to whether these species are reproducing at sea already as the debris floats along the coast. There's no reason why the Misawa dock wasn't releasing propagules and larvae as it was inbound to Agate Beach. This we don't know. We didn't have a chance to look at the viability of those organisms before that material was destroyed, although we might be able to tell from some frozen samples. We don't want to underestimate the possibility of secondary transport. There are always surprises. Here's one. Paper from Conservation Biology a few weeks ago that the alvin appears to have been moving species around hydrothermal vents. Footwear, interesting study from a few years ago where a group of workers intercepted folks coming to the Antarctic and found on the Velcro and other clothing of visitors, including many scientists, 64 different people sampled, 981 propagules representing 90 species of plants were inbound. And we have some other data as well. Students have carried from some unknown college program, have carried marine snails from Oregon to Connecticut on their tennis shoes. So there's always the possibility, something we have to be very much aware of in terms of secondary transport, and we'll be talking about that at this workshop. Importantly, we mustn't lose track of the opportunities that we can take advantage of this unhappy situation for learning something about invasion science. There's all kinds of things here that are absolutely fascinating in a fundamental sort of way. That can, of course, ideally help with our predictive capabilities. And it's that predictive capability that is fundamental to management. Management is a central question of management, typically asks of science. What can you predict? And of course, we often say we're extraordinarily limited. But here's a really interesting phenomenon, one that many of us expected never to see, and which we may not see again for a long time. We hope, indeed, that's the case for the citizens of Japan. This goes to something we call the invasion process. It's a classic model. This is many of those 40,000 pages deal with the invasion process. It's a model that deals with 8 very standard steps. It has to do with how you leave an area, what happens as you get to an area, what happens after you get to an area. In this model, there are a number of steps of early entrainment and transport. There's a whole bunch of things that happen when you arrive, and that's called inoculation. Notice that introduction isn't until stage 7. The species on the Massawa dock were not introduced to Oregon. It was an inoculum in a sense of this scenario. You're not an introduced species until you are established and reproducing, and then after that, you may spread or you may not spread. This classic model is one that we use for quantitative approaches. And those quantitative approaches focus on what the probabilities are of a number of scenarios. What's the probability of actually engaging with the vector? What's the probability of surviving? What's the probability of, after you survive and you gain access, of actually leaving the vector? What's the probability of reproduction? What's the probability of not going extinct? This is a very severe set of filters. And this is why most species do not make it through the vector process. The fact that we had so many high-profile invaders on the Massawa dock speaks to some extent, why they are so successful. That was presumably a rigorous voyage at a number of levels. And those are rigorous species that have done well around the world, and they have made it through all of these steps and continued on to circle back through emigration again. Transport and arrival are our opportunities here with the JTMD mod. And that's something we can take great advantage of. And at this workshop, we're going to be able to explore, I hope, these very interesting issues of how science interfaces with management. It's in the documents that are before you. The working groups discuss this a lot in telephone conversations. And one of the most vexing sorts of things is exactly the scenario posed. And we'll be talking about, I think, at one of the breakout sessions is, what if one of those other 2 Massawa docks arrives? There were 4. One was found in Japan, 1 came ashore at Agate Beach, and 2 have not been accounted for. What if we find it off the coast? What if it looks, in the way of biofouling, much like the one that landed at Agate Beach? Then what? There were a lot of interesting discussions, I think, in the next day and a half on that. In terms of this process, we can gather a lot of key data if we have access to the JTMD/mod debris in a timely manner. That may not be possible with hazards to navigation. May not be possible for other reasons. But certainly we can generate a very impressive list of data very quickly on the identity of these species, their abundance, their density, the quality of the propagules in terms of their viability, species traits, the genetics of many of these species. There's a lot of fascinating data here, and we don't want to miss this opportunity, which again, if all goes well, will never happen again. What does the future hold? Debris arriving in 13, 14, 15, and so on. In general, even though we were surprised by the Massawa dock, life is not good out there in the open ocean, and JBF on mod will steadily decline, and it will go to 0. Will that happen by 2013, 2014? We don't know. But in all probability, the Japanese tsunami debris, the last of it that will arrive some years from now, we'd be extraordinarily surprised, as we have before, if JBF is still on that debris. Here's what we think the future world might look like. This is a small buoy that washed ashore at Salmon Creek in Bodega, near Bodega Bay, Bodega Harbor, last month. The markings were not sufficient to say it was from Japan necessarily. A lot of things come in with Japanese, Korean, and Chinese words on them. But it had Megabalanus rosa on it. That's a Japanese species. This is Japanese marine tsunami. We don't need the marks to tell that. And our prediction of future scenarios is exactly this. a sea of, hopefully, not living barnacles coming to the West Coast. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, we have plenty of time for questions. Gail, can you introduce yourself?
First, how many taxonomists are here? How many people here are actually taxonomists? Now, I happen to be a taxonomist. How come with all of these people here, how come nobody who's a taxonomist has enough money to get here? How come you're not allowed to get here? One, I don't think they're that expensive. Each one of you has salaries. How come we can't have salaries? It's very annoying. And we do the first step of what you need to know for these introductions. So we find one of these things that's been releasing spores and is going to invade the environment. How do we recognize it in the native environment? If it's subtitled, how many people here are looking in the subtitle for some of these organisms? In Oregon, we've done some of the first surveys for subtitle seaweeds that have ever been done in the last 2 or 3 years. How are we going to recognize if something comes into the subtitle? It's on a floating dock or on in a harbor, we might recognize it. But how will we even recognize it? So here we're going to try and determine what's on these docks. How are we going to recognize them when they come into our native environment? It's a really difficult problem. And you have to, we've stopped funding taxonomists because they're all doing biologically now. But you have to start getting taxonomists in your areas who go out and at least look for these things. Otherwise, we're not going to know what's being introduced in our areas. And mostly that's what I wanted to say. We're not that expensive.
Gail's not expensive. Gail Hansen, one of our leading American phycologists, who was very much involved with identifying all the seaweeds on the Mosawa Dock, but we do deal with a few taxonomists who want a little more than Gail has very kindly helped us with. We have extremely few monitoring programs to detect new invasions in this country, and there are very few around the world. This is one of the issues that we dealt with when Greg Ruiz, who was here, and I co-chaired an NRC committee on ballast water last year. And what often came up was our understanding of the rate of invasions. How many come in, where they come from, the frequency, and so on. And this has a lot to do, of course, with understanding what exactly is out there. And we have a great many sobering stories about relatively large species that are right along our coastline that no one has noticed. It's often been said that you will never meet a marine biologist on the beach. We're actually at the computers writing grant proposals. And so our eyes and ears of the coast are the public, constituencies who are exploring the coast, but we have, as Gail says, very few programs that really consistently, for long terms, explore the biodiversity of the coast. There are a lot of assumptions out there among the press and the government, and I think the media as well, about the extent to which we have our finger on the pulse of change of biodiversity in the coastal zone. And we could have another workshop that would address just that issue. And there are just a lot of stories that are very sobering about how we do not have our pulse on that level of change of diversity, and that we can very easily miss rather large invasions among certain groups that simply no one is studying. It's a good point.
So, Julia Parrish, I'm going to hopefully inject some positive thoughts here. Coming down here, I was thinking about a program that we spend a lot of time working with in the terrestrial environment called iNaturalist. And it's an iPhone, a smartphone program that was started by some faculty at Berkeley. And it's a cool double crowdsource program. So people take photographs of thing X that you find, and then it's sort of testosterone-filled, competitive naturalizing, right? So for the crowd of experts that's online, how quickly can you identify X thing? And so far, it's really been used primarily in the terrestrial environment, in biolist kinds of things. But within the last year or so, iNaturalist has grown to adopt all
Yeah, it's a good question and good thought. I'm a huge champion of citizen science. And in terrestrial systems, I think it has worked extremely well. The bioblitzes that are most advanced are in parks and things like that. And there are a lot of really good systematic botanists out there who can quickly, within a few hours, identify whether it's a new weed or not. And a lot of the insect people are very good at that as well. One of the things as I mentioned in one slide, one of our challenges with extending that to the marine environment would be to find enough people out there who will respond to those photographs. But I think it's a great idea. It's the kind of thing where we have a lot of people who can take a lot more photographs than they ever could historically with their iPhones and get the stuff to us very quickly. One of the things we'll be talking about here is what do you do with those photographs, and there are relatively few people to whom they would go. So I think there's a very big difference between terrestrial and marine monitoring, but I'm still a huge champion of extending that into the marine world, and we would deal with those challenges.
More questions for Jim? Plenty of time. Sir, can you type?
Yeah, Ian Davidson at PSU and CERC.
Hi, Ian.
You mentioned that the Massawa dock doesn't allow us to approach the asymptote for the cumulative richness of fouling that may be associated with all the material that washes up. Do you know if there was an effort made to generate the curve for the Massawa dock itself, whether 88 approaches the asymptote?
No, we haven't done that. John Chapman's talked about that, and we've talked about just running back over to Massawa just to see what might have started on the dock. It's hard to say. We're amazed about how much survived because we don't know what started, of course. But that's something we'd like to do, and I think if we get a few more pieces of similar sized debris, we'll have enough numbers to start generating some models for that. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Any other questions for Jim?
Or a break.
Well, if we do, we're ahead of schedule.
More people to talk.
Is that it? You gonna let Jim get off?
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, we are about 14 minutes ahead of schedule, so we were going to do a 15-minute break, and during that break, the folks that we identified to be on the next panel, these are the folks from the different states and jurisdictions that are going to provide an update on what they've been doing within their jurisdiction. So quick break, and then get started in the next panel. Thanks so much. We're going to get started, folks, and I think, Stephanie, you had an announcement. Stephanie Kavanaugh, our facilitator.
So, real quickly, folks, I wanted to do a quick straw poll of who in this room either did not print out or does not have electronic access to the framework document so that you can have it in front of you during the breakout groups this afternoon. You can please raise your hand because we're going to coordinate making some copies of those pages that you need to look at during the breakout groups for me. Does anyone need me to repeat that? Okay. Question? Keep your hands up. Wait, let me count first. I can't do two things at once. I'm sorry.
We're counting hands.
Yes, I'll say that again. So anyone who, let me use the mic. So this afternoon in the breakout groups, we'll be asking folks to refer to certain pages of the draft framework document to answer some questions and have dialogue. And so I know that the email with the final framework doc that went out fairly late on Friday night. So I'm anticipating that there might be some folks that weren't able to print it themselves. I do have a web address that I'll post on the wall for those that can download it on your iPad or whatever. But I just wanted to have folks raise their hands if you would like to request a printed copy of those pages that you need in front of you during the breakout groups this afternoon. Is that okay? So let me. Okay, thank you. It's a rough estimate that I'll round up.
Yeah. The poor trees. So our next panel, and I will extend my apologies, this group I just invited less than a week ago. to provide an update from each of the jurisdictions in the sort of impact zone. This is not an exhaustive group, but these are the folks that stepped up and willingly accepted my invitation. And we understand that the states and different jurisdictions have been getting, have different levels of responses and coordination going on. So, but we felt it was important to at least hear from the states and also from British Columbia, but unfortunately we couldn't get a representative from the province, but Tom Theriault from DFO is here and will speak on behalf of what's going on in Canada. So we're going to start north to south, and Tammy Davis from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game thankfully has joined us, and I appreciate her getting here.
Thanks. Guess I need to. I did. Thanks, Peg, and thanks again for your extra effort getting me here. What's being done, excuse me, in Alaska is divided and not very well coordinated at this point. In January, a piece of debris arrived in Kodiak and was reported to Linda Shaw, our NOAA Marine Invasive Species representative. And she informed members of our fledgling marine subcommittee for our sort of unobserved invasive species working group. And from that, Linda McCann, who is with Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, working with Sea Grant, Gary Freitag, Linda, and myself, we developed a pretty basic standard protocol and preservation data sheet for anybody who might find debris that was biofouled. It's been sparsely distributed, and although it's available on a few websites, I don't know of anyone having used it. We have had several reports since January of marine debris, none that I'm aware of that have been biofouled. So our lessons learned tie in very closely with our gaps, and that is that there are many. Our state, federal, tribal, and local agencies are not communicating very well on this issue. And although there has been work on marine debris and the challenges of marine debris, the invasive species component has mostly been left off of those discussions until this workshop communication started to open up those avenues of communication. So communication, planning, and coordination are definitely key gaps. Accomplishments that I'd like to see come out of this meeting are assistance with coordination, communication, and planning, standard protocol for monitoring, and ways to engage the public. Although we have some invasive species monitoring on the ground, it's limited, and we hate to overtax those great citizen monitors. Thank you.
Tom Theriault from Canada, DFO.
Okay. First of all, again, thank you for inviting us to the table. In Canada, we're playing a little bit of catch up on AIS and tsunami debris. We have had a FedProv group working on tsunami debris in general for over a year now, but AIS and tsunami debris was not on their radar initially. I did raise it internally, and it has subsequently been added to the FedProv protocols. I think initially the thoughts in that group were that we wouldn't have to deal with AIS right away. We had to deal with the litter issue, the pollution issue, and the concerns from the public about radiation. Those were sort of the first targets. Given the arrival of the dock, that dramatically changed things. I think for the better for my program, So now we're much more engaged on the importance of Japanese organisms potentially arriving throughout the entire West Coast. And I think that's another area where BC and Canada in general are both eager to be participating in an activity that represents the entire West Coast of North America. That it's not an isolated problem for us in British Columbia to deal with. And really what we're looking for is outcomes from this workshop and other fora to really develop a cohesive plan for debris and AIS and tsunami debris in general, so that we're all sort of on the same page. So we want to take a response that's equivalent to what's going to be taken in Washington or Oregon or Alaska, so that we're not doing a lot more or doing a lot less. So.
Great, thanks, Tom. Our next speaker is Alan Playas from the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Unfortunately, got called off to another meeting, and last minute step in, Kevin Anderson from the Puget Sound Partnership offered to sort of fill in about Washington.
Right. So I am Kevin Anderson, and I do work for the Puget Sound Partnership. And our role in the Puget Sound is to protect and restore Puget Sound from a number of threats, including invasive species. And I need to apologize for not knowing exactly all of the details of what Alan would have covered and what the questions were asked of the panelists to cover, but let me just tell you what I know at a high level, and maybe Wendy Brown from the Washington Invasive Species Council can fill in if I leave out stuff. But we are fairly well organized in our state in terms of the big marine debris issue. We have the governor, right after the dock landed on Oregon Beach, our governor called together our agencies and created a management structure for managing marine debris. She designated the military department's was an emergency management division to coordinate the coordination with the federal agencies, tribal governments, marine sanctuaries, the state agencies. And within that structure, she also designated the Department of Ecology to manage the debris, disposal of the debris and handling of some of the hazardous materials. Also, she designated the Department of Health to respond to health-related issues with the marine debris, including radiation and any disease and other kinds of health-related problems. She also designated the Department of Fish and Wildlife as the responder for invasive species associated with marine debris, and that's the role that Alan would play here. Fortunately, too, that the governor has given money, like $250,000 to facilitate this coordination of the structure that she created. She's also set aside just recently $100,000 to manage and dispose of the debris that shows up. And she also, I should just say this, sees that the role for responding to marine debris is a federal role, and that she'll continue to work with our partners, her partners, and her contemporaries in Alaska, Oregon, and California to find money to respond to these this particular problem. And I'm hoping maybe that the money that you brought to the table is part of that conversation that the governors have been having with NOAA. So we appreciate the money coming, and that I know that Alan Ployce has already made his application. One of our big problems is not having enough money to respond. I should also just mention a couple of other things, that we do have a draft plan for responding to marine debris, and part of that is a piece on invasive, a protocol for responding to invasive species on marine debris. I don't know exactly what the status is of it is. I know that in our state also the Washington Invasive Species Council is handling coordination amongst all the agencies related to marine debris issues on this one. So Department of Natural Resources, Department of Health and Agriculture also involved in this. Our Department of Fish and Wildlife has responded to one significant landing of a 21-foot boat on one of our marine parks. I used up a lot of money and time, but learned a lot of stuff. We also created a hotline for calling in if people find marine debris with organisms on it. Whether or not we have the capacity as an agent or as a state to respond to all of those calls is a big problem for us. We also have a number of waivers to regulatory requirements put in place already for helping us respond to this problem. One of the agencies has called a hydraulics project approval, which requires that any time that you're on the beach working with heavy equipment or in a wetland area, you need a permit from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. The Fish and Wildlife Commission has given a waiver for responding to those kinds of things in the marine environment. We also have a number of NPDES permits, which are National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits that authorize us to use various chemicals if we need them to decontaminate contaminated debris. And the only other thing I'd like to say is that we have a number of in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, there is an entity called the Northwest Straits. Northwest Straits. What is the? Yeah, the Northwest Straits Commission. Sorry, excuse me. That in May actually brought together its 7 marine resource committees, and these marine resource committees are locally based committees to do a training on marine debris and have them ready to identify marine debris and invasive species. So one of the things that came out of the workshops, there was like 3 days of workshops for those marine resource committees, was that 75% of whatever comes into Puget Sound through the Straits of Juan de Fuca is going to land up on 10% of the shoreline. So we kind of know, at least in the Strait of Juan de Fuca, where to look for marine debris and where to look for invasive species associated with that marine debris. We don't know that for the same situation on the coast. And in fact, a large portion of our coast is inaccessible. It's in tribal ownership, and Northwest Straits Olympic Coast, somebody was over here for the sanctuary, marine sanctuary. And so we don't even know if anybody's looking for marine debris or marine debris with invasive species, but we need that access at some point. And I think the other thing that we need to do is harness more of our NGOs. A lot of the NGOs, the surf riders, and a number of other organizations are out there looking all the time, but we need to give them something to look for. I mean, you know, we may want to provide identification cards for things like Undaria or whatever the other organisms that are showing up on the debris. So those are some of the things that I can share with you. I'm sorry that Alan couldn't make it, and maybe Wendy, if you have anything to add.
Wendy, did you have anything? Okay, thanks, Wendy.
Just one more thing, too, that I know that the Department of Ecology has assigned a Washington Conservation Corps to do some work along the beaches, basically to pick up debris, but also there's an opportunity to engage them to find and report invasive species associated with that
That's
debris.
good. Thanks, Kevin. And I have some emails from Alan and your communications person about putting your links on the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force website, and I apologize, we didn't have the Washington link in there, but we had the other jurisdictions. So we'll have that updated when we finish this workshop. So thank you, Wendy. Okay, our next presenter is Karen Braby from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and clearly Oregon has been the most experienced of the group in terms of dealing with this issue. So thank you so much for your presentation.
So you have to indulge me. I'm taking the home field advantage and giving you a presentation instead of just giving you brief remarks. But I tried to make it at least visually interesting. So we are happy to be the host of this esteemed group. We were not so happy to be the host of the doc, but that's the way the hand was dealt. So I'm hoping that I can share some lessons. Most of the things that I'm bringing up have already been mentioned today, but I'll bring them up again just to reinforce what we've learned. We've been having discussions within the state since early this year about anticipating debris landfall, and that discussion has been happening with state agencies, federal agencies, including NOAA and others. Actually, NGOs played quite a large role in this state in getting this conversation started, including both Solve, who does biannual beach cleanups for Oregon, as well as Surfrider, that's already been mentioned today. And, of course, the Oregon Invasive Species Council, which is important as a multi-agency, multi-partner group. That's also important within my agency. Rick Boatner is the chair of that group here, and so ODFW has had a fairly large role in the discussion so far. But that discussion was fairly low level, and it surprised us when the doc arrived with such impact in many ways. And I'll pose the question for you: were we prepared for this event, and how not? So the doc arrived. It was earlier than we expected to have significant marine debris in Oregon. It was larger than we expected. Invasive species were prominent on this substantial landfall. We didn't expect that. And it landed in an accessible and populated location. So that was great. The other three, not so great. All right. So we had a very rapid, multi-partner, somewhat well-coordinated response to the doc. Oregon State University was very prominent in collecting biological samples from the doc, including John Chapman, who is proudly standing at the top of this picture, as well as Jessica Miller, who's also in the room. Gail Hansen did a lot of identification of algae. So where this doc landed, we had this amazing community of experts who could help identify species that landed. We also had locally my group, the Marine Program that is part of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, including Steve Rumrell, who's in the room, and we had Rick Boatner's expertise. So on site, we had management experts to deal with this dock. And within the state, we have the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, who has jurisdiction over anything that lands in the intertidal beach ecosystem. We also had expertise in the form of Oregon Sea Grant, Sam Chan, and Steve Brandt, who's helped put this workshop together. So we had a lot of people very quickly engaged in dealing with this issue, first identifying that it was an issue and then responding to the doc. This montage was created, I believe by Jessica. I haven't confirmed this. I believe by Jessica and John, but certainly by OSU academics who identified very concerning invasive species, particularly the northern Pacific sea star and Undaria, as well as the Japanese shore crab. ODFW came in and took the lead in cleaning off, eradicating the dock of its biofouling material. This action was, I am confident, needed at the time, but in retrospect, having the expectation of what to do with invasive species would have been nice prior to this dock arriving, so that we could have been of more assistance in collecting samples for scientific questions. That's something that I'll come to in a minute, something that I hope that the workshop will help to at least begin to address. Steve Rumrell led this team, did an outstanding job of trying to contain all of the biological material that was being taken off the dock, capturing organisms in tarps and buckets, and keeping it from being swept away in the waves. It took about 13 staff members over 2 days to clean off the material. It included equipment that was in hand. It included equipment that needed to be rented. And I'm stressing this just for other jurisdictions who might have to respond to these kinds of events. It's not necessarily equipment and people that you have ready to respond quickly. This is Steve torching the dock after the scraping was completed. Again, not clear if we needed to do this, but this was intended to remove the dock of any microorganisms or any algal films, remains of holdfasts, and so on. What Steve is torching in this picture is a fender that prevents docks from slamming into the side of the concrete dock when it's actually in its native environment. We had to remove those fenders. They were encrusted on the inside with mussels, barnacles, other organisms, and so those were cleaned as well. Parks and Rec then took the lead on burying the material above the high tide line where they couldn't be re-exposed to the marine environment so that the organisms would die. And that was our primary management concern or priority, was to make sure that we intercepted the material and prevented further spread and establishment. Over 2 tons of material was removed. It's a lot of material. It's a big pile. Primarily seaweed, mussels, and barnacles, and then lots and lots and lots of small, interesting and important other organisms. So the lessons that we learned, and this is still with the dock in process, our first lesson was, okay, we cleaned it off, now what? What do we do with it? And there was a lot of interest and a lot of differing opinions that are persisting today. The dock is planning, we're going to start removal tomorrow, and the debate is still going on. The first question was, were we fully successful in eradicating potentially invasive species? A lot of local representatives were very interested in having the dock remain on site because it was such a tourist attraction. We had people from Seattle, we had people from California, everyone who was going through Oregon went via Newport just to take a look at it. I mean, it's just a big concrete thing, but it gained a lot of interest. There was talk about sinking the dock offshore, actually towing it off the beach and sinking it. There was talk about towing it offshore and pulling it into an estuary. Both the Columbia River and Yaquina Bay were considered as resting spots, which makes that first question a really important one, because if we're going to take it somewhere and let it sit in an estuary, it better be clean before we do that. Landfill disposal was a question, a memorial to the tragedy of the tsunami. was also raised. And where Oregon has landed with the dock is that we're putting it in the landfill. And my understanding is that a portion of the dock will also become a memorial in Newport. So the second lesson, and I'm getting rapidly to the end, so thanks for indulging me. The cost, just in terms of staff time, rentals for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife was about $2,800. For OPRD, who took the lead in renting the backhoe and burying the material, it was about $2,000. And for the contract to cut up the dock and put it in landfill was about $84,000. So again, we've been talking about funding. NOAA has generously, and we very much appreciate the funding, has decided that they can spare about $50,000 for each state, but that is minimal in terms of the costs that are going to be incurred locally. Our post-doc response, and you're supposed to laugh here, is that we quickly realized the need for additional communication, and my agency stepped in to try to help all of the interests communicate better by providing a web page, but it's one of many in Oregon that are providing information on marine debris as well as invasive species. We've developed a fact sheet on what the public can do about finding marine debris, especially marine debris that has living organisms on it. And our first priority here as managers is to prevent establishment. And so we went through a process of identifying high-risk items. I hope that the discussion of what high-risk items are continues at this workshop and hones that idea. And the second priority, and I'm a scientist, so this hurts me to say this, but the second priority is scientific sampling. OPRD did a great job in streamlining communications and creating a 211 response line, and hearing the story from Washington that you're proliferating in websites and phone numbers and stuff. We got a lot of heat from legislators, from the public, in having a very difficult response system, and that forced us to really streamline to the 211 system, the beach debris, email, and that's it. And that includes invasive species response, it includes marine debris, it includes hazards. The only thing it doesn't really include is a call to the Coast Guard for navigational safety issues. We've seen a huge increase in public reporting because the media interest was so hot. The governor has created a task force at the executive level to try and address a number of issues, including the funding issue. And we've all been trying to figure out the best way to message to the public what to do and what the issues are. That's an ongoing battle. Another lesson is that, and I'm saying this to other managers and researchers, when we say, LEPIS isn't a problem, that doesn't always communicate what the issue is. This is a Japanese float. This is potentially a high-risk item. It's something we expect was in the marine environment in Japan. It's covered in LEPIS. It was reported as being an item that was covered in white clams. So without the photographic evidence, we wouldn't know what this was. And so that really emphasizes the importance of visual information as well as verbal information, because the standard reporter of these events is not a marine taxonomist. I'm sorry, Gail, but there just aren't enough of us out there, right? The other lesson is that we're really fortunate with the dock, and what we really need to be thinking about is the worst case scenario. This was the best case scenario, really. And we could have had this dock land in a very isolated, very exposed location, possibly in the shallow subtidal where it isn't even exposed all the time or ever, even at low tide, and far away from marine scientists, from responders. The other lesson is that the world is watching. I've had interviews with German television and Japanese print media, And it shocked me to hear from the Japanese reporter that she was so sorry that we had to deal with the burden of marine debris. And that just emphasized to me what's already been mentioned today, that primarily this is a human tragedy, and we're fortunate that what we're dealing with is just some trash. And it very easily could have happened to Oregon, and it could be Japan that was responding to our trash. And so I made that point to her, but I encourage everyone who has the opportunity to interact with folks that message come loud and clear. So Oregon's strengths and weaknesses, we have an incredible community of scientists who can identify and respond to these questions. We did do a fairly good job with communication. It's getting better all the time. We have very enthusiastic beachcombers. I have reports from all up and down the coast that our beaches have never been so clean. A lot of the items are on eBay, but that's okay. Weaknesses are funding, and that the Oregon coastline is mostly inaccessible and isolated. My hopes, this is not meant to be institutional representation, my own hopes. Who do we turn to when we, the royal we, gets overwhelmed? And what really are the highest risk marine debris items? What are the important scientific questions? And this is near and dear to my heart. I used to be an invasion ecologist in my former lifetime. I would love to answer some of the questions that Jim talked about, that others are talking about. What is it that's most important that we could learn from this? We'll do the sampling. We'll send you the samples. But we just need to know what it is and to really streamline what those questions are so that we can allocate our resources in the best way. Part of that, how many samples, which species? That's getting really into the weeds, but it's important. How ultimately are we going to pay for this? How are we going to eradicate this risk? That is my primary goal as a manager now. And getting back to that concept of what do we do with it? What now? Do we sink it? Can we sink it? Should we sink it? Do we pull it into Yaquina Bay? No, that was our recommendation. Fortunately, our sister agencies agreed with us, and they're now getting ready to cut up a dock with a wire saw. So that's all I have for you. And thanks for the indulgence. Thanks, Yep.
We thought we'd hold the questions until the whole panel is done. Our next speaker is Susan Ellis from the California Department of Fish and Game.
Good morning. It's kind of hard to follow that. And I'd like to go back to Tammy's presentation and say that California is also sort of disjointed at this point. The Emergency Management Agency and the resources agencies really haven't coordinated well on this, and it really didn't, kind of come to our attention until the dock. So I found out this morning, only because I was sitting at the table with a Park Service colleague, Sarah Allen, that the California Emergency Management Agency has a draft document, and Nancy mentioned it. I looked through it while we were on break and found that the invasive species portion is not well developed, and we look forward to taking what we learn at this workshop and helping develop that document more so that we have a more comprehensive document. In California, we have many agencies, departments that work along the coast. We have been struggling over the last couple of weeks with really what are our various roles and how do we get to a place where Oregon is, even where Washington is, that we can get a report and respond appropriately. We have our Ocean Protection Council, Ocean Science Trust group that has really stepped up in a big way to take on a lead role for communication and facilitation. And their next meeting, we want to review this meeting. We have some representatives from those groups here and see how we can move forward and do the right type of response and communication. We have a couple of great assets in our state, and it comes from our Marine Invasive Species Program that is at our State Lands Commission, and we have a representative from State Lands here too. And then our Marine Invasive Species Program at Fish and Game, which is funded from that program at State Lands to do the monitoring along the coast. And currently, they work with Greg Ruiz and his group on doing the systematic monitoring for biofouling organisms, whether it's hull fouling or also those that come in for ballast water, and looking at the long-term trends. So we have that great asset as we move forward as far as a resource. That group has also developed a good core group of the citizen scientists. Some of it came out of an Undaria response in San Francisco Bay. And so we do have some tools, we just haven't put them together for this response, for this activity as far as the tsunami response. We also have our experience with Invasive Species Incident Command, where we pulled people together for our Cholera eradication project. Maybe that's 6-7 years ago now. And more recently, while not marine, we have had an incident command for a quagga mussel introduction infestation in Southern California. This sort of is an ongoing program now, where we did bring the federal and state agencies together to try to coordinate response to an invasion. You know, sort of the next steps for us is to take the building blocks that we have, take the tools that we get here, a lot of it about the communication, and really move forward so that we can do a concerted effort with the other states. And my expectation from this workshop really is to get those tools, and I'm really thankful that this was pulled together, because I think it was 2 weeks ago we had a refrigerator that washed up on the shore, Big Sur Beach. So it's a lot of people don't get there, or it's a long way for an agency to get there. And we had a surfer who saw this refrigerator. It had Japanese characters on it, took a picture of it, and that went to a lot of the different agencies. And, you know, we sort of determined, well, this would be a terrestrially originated item if it did come from Japan and through the tsunami, but our State Parks Department responded and went and looked at it and sent more pictures. And so I think a lot of people are really aware of the issue now, and we're going to have a lot more of these beachcombers and citizen scientists out there reporting stuff. So we really want to know, you know, really where's our decision tree, and how do we move forward with looking at the important incidents.
Great, Susan, thanks. And Sonia Gorgula is from the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources, and we can't forget about the impacts that may be out there. So thank you, Sonia, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Peg. I guess this issue has just landed on our radar really recently as well. We, the Department of Land and Natural Resources, was just designated as the lead agency to respond to debris, or the Japanese tsunami marine debris, and that department fortunately would respond both to the invasive species risk, which would be me, and
sorry,
and also in most cases would probably respond to the physical removal of the debris. The issues in Hawaii are that it depends on where it lands as to who actually remove it. And I've already heard jokes about, oh, if it lands on the shore, we'll just push it out to the water, and then you guys can deal with it. So we've had some discussions already, our department, with NOAA, with the Pacific coordinator, Kerry Morishige. And she mentioned that NOAA is developing a response plan for both the main Hawaiian Islands and the northwest Hawaiian Islands. The reason for the separation is that the main Hawaiian Islands are the state jurisdiction, and the northwestern are NOAA, or federal. And I guess, so she's looking to our department to then fill the gap for what needs to go into the main Hawaiian Island plan on the on the state side, as to how we would respond. We would be looking to this workshop to get guidance on, and hopefully walk away with a protocol for how to respond to debris that may or may not show up. As I understand it, it really depends on the weather patterns as to whether it will land on any of the Hawaiian Islands. The Northwest Hawaiian Islands probably receive more debris than the main Hawaiian Islands. And in the main islands, you're talking about, I think, about 7 islands, of which 2 of them are where I think they're our highest accumulation points. One of those points is inaccessible by road, and when they've had debris turn up before, they've actually used helicopters to get it out. So logistically, if anything does show up in Hawaii, it'll be quite difficult to respond to. We also have, our islands have fringing reefs, so there will be a lot of damage potentially to those habitats. And so I think obviously the gaps that we have are having a protocol to utilise, to know how to respond, because our department was just given the, I guess, just designated as needing to deal with this issue. We're at the point of just trying to work out what would be our internal phone tree and who needs to know depending on the type of debris and also where it is. 9 times out, I think I'd have to respond every time, just from the invasive species aspect. But, and I think our strengths are that we do have on Oahu, so on the most populated island, we do have a field team that currently their main job is to control the spread and impacts of invasive species that we already have in our coastal areas. So that's what they're really dedicated to at the moment, and they focus a lot on algal species. And I guess they would be there to immobilise to take to another island, but logistically, obviously, that is very costly and, yeah, would be difficult. We do have some taxonomists on island, which is good, a phycologist and an invertebrate specialist, but I guess, as you all know, there's a real dearth of taxonomists, and they're also they're often out in the field, like they're very busy people too. So, yeah, getting access to them would be a problem. But I think one of the strengths actually is that the citizens in Hawaii, the people, are very, very concerned about their natural environment. So already there was an incident, I think just last week or the week before, a crab that has a pelagic stage in its life cycle. For whatever reason, hundreds of these crabs just washed up on shore, I think around Waikiki, so there's lots of people there. And there was all this media, and they started saying, oh, maybe it's from the Japanese tsunami. Oh, maybe it came. Yeah, and so there was a lot of concern, and there was emails, but I think that's a real plus, because I think then that those people will be our eyes and our ears. Yeah, that's all for me.
Thank you, Sonia. We have a few minutes for questions, and I also, before I turn it over to the questions, if there are any federal agency representatives, land managers here that would like to step up and say a few words about maybe what they're doing within their own refuges and parks, I appreciate it. But let's turn it over to the questions for this group first. Sir, can you tell us who your name is?
If I can jump in real quick, Peg.
Okay.
I didn't mention one thing that's really huge for Alaska, and that's most of my other panelists up have talked about the challenges of remote areas. And in case you don't know, Alaska not only has the largest coastline, but most of it is remote. And so even knowing that debris has arrived is a challenge for us. And so although we are always appreciative of funding, just surveying costs a lot of money in Alaska, and so that's a huge hurdle for us. So I just thought I should point that out in case anybody didn't know.
We just all assume that. So questions, sir? can you say your name and? That's fine. I made questions or comments, so we'll take it. Sir, can you say your name, please?
Josh Fisher, I'm an invasive species specialist with Fish and Wildlife Honolulu. I got a question for Aaron. How is the fouling underneath the dock addressed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what about fouling underneath the dock? And we have biologists on site waiting to evaluate that question right now. And we won't know until we start cutting it up, because by the time we were able to inspect it, it was already on the beach. So nobody's been able to get under there. There has been sand scour around the edges, and Steve and others have looked kind of under the edge of the dock to see, and it looks clear, but you don't know until it's...
I mean, could it just scraped off on its way in?
It probably scraped off on its way in, yes. So whatever was on the bottom is out there.
Nancy.
Nancy Wallace, Marine Debris Program. My question for the panelists is, obviously we're talking today about the tsunami debris, but I'm curious what happens in your states on a regular basis if there's a report of an invasive species. Kind of what's the normal protocol that you all respond to, or is that even, does that happen? If you could just give a little bit of a sense of what the everyday situation is, that would be really helpful.
Well, in Washington, we do have, through the Washington Invasive Species Council, a reporting hotline. That's an online form that you can fill in, and a telephone number. For the marine debris, there is another number, which is 54 Washington, whatever, I've forgotten the number. But anyway, we have two different numbers. But yeah, so, and what we're hoping is that people are, a lot of the detection that we do is through passive, sending out, if you see this thing, report it, and that's kind of the way we're getting our feedback from the public. And so that's why I was suggesting we need these same things for the people that are doing the beach walks. What are we looking for, and how should we report it? Yeah.
Tammy?
Alaska has a hotline 1-877-invasive, and luckily it doesn't get a lot of action. It goes to me directly, and then I, sort of relay that out to stakeholders. How well publicized that number is, we haven't done any sort of evaluation of that effectiveness, but certainly even like our Department of Natural Resources does terrestrial invasive species work, and they use that same reporting number, and that has been posted in addition to the NOAA website in any outreach on the Japanese tsunami debris.
Just a clarification, if I'm not mistaken, the number of the numbers you're going to mention are all taxa. It could be terrestrial, it could be freshwater, and it could be marine. So these folks are covering pretty much the full scope of invasive issues. So correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, that's correct. It's for Alaska.
It's
So
similar in, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
It's similar, because it's so similar. In Oregon, we have the Oregon Invasive Species Council, and we have a phone number and a web portal so that you can submit photos. So that is, and it's all taxa. In my tenure and my position, I'm only aware of one response in the marine environment that was kind of an active response, and that was to try and eradicate didymnum, a colonial tunicate from Winchester Bay, and Sam Chan and others who are here were involved in that process. but it's not a normal everyday thing that we respond to invasive species because the vectors are kind of outside the fish and wildlife spectrum.
So, sorry. Because in Canada we do have reporting lines as well. We've actually separated ours. The marine species are reported via phone or email that actually comes by a backdoor to my desk. So it's not monitored when I'm not there, which is a problem with it. The freshwater fish are reported by the British Columbia reporting mechanism, which is their established observe, record, report system, and that goes to Matthias Herborg, so who's on leave. So that is being monitored in his absence, but I think there's holes in both of those. If you were familiar with the snakehead that was introduced to BC not too long ago, that was after the media got a hold of a YouTube video of the fish swimming in a lake in Burnaby, so that didn't come to any reporting line. So it's nice that we have the reporting lines, but we often hear from it not through the reporting lines.
In California, we have a similar system. We have an invasives email account where there's reporting through the Department of Fish and Game. There's also for the terrestrial one at our Department of Food and Agriculture. We have a hotline that is primarily for quagga and zebra mussels. And then the other way we get reports is through the Fish and Wildlife Service. Maybe Ron Smith can remind me what that's called. And we had a report of something today from that. And it's a recording through some center where the person calling in leaves a message, and then that's routed to the state. So we got one, I think, last week, another one this week, and it's for a variety. It was a water wheat this week, and I'm not, maybe alligator gar last week. So, so we have those reporting systems.
That hotline is manned 24/7, national hotline. Information goes from there to the regional coordinators for the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's also forwarded to each of the state aquatic species program coordinators, similar to Susan and some of the other organizations as well.
A couple other questions came, I saw hands before. Yes, Stephen. Oh, sorry, Steve. Two Stevens. Oh, that's Steve. Okay. Steve Rumrell.
I was going to make the point that we have a history along the West Coast of different standards among the states and provinces. And just thinking very quickly about Zoster japonica, invading down the coastline, dealt with it in a different way by the various states. Same thing with purple varnish clams coming back again. So we need to make sure that we keep that focus on developing up a consistent region-wide response here, rather than having it dealt with in piecemeal.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen Brandt.
Please, Steve almost asked my question. I was wondering if there's an existing forum or structure right now that would be the most appropriate to use to foster that regional coordination across the states. It seems like each of the states have a well-developed program. Is there something that already exists that will make things easier to look at standardizing protocols or interactive databases or things like that?
I can take a shot at that if you don't mind. You want to do it, Tammy? Actually, a bunch of us are members of the Western Regional Panel, and the Western Regional Panel is one of 6 panels that are mandated by Congress to support the ANS task force. The panel has been around for quite a while, and so it's also a very large area, geographic area. It includes, I can't remember, but most of the western United States. So we have this problem of, when we're working together, separating ourselves from the inland issues and the coastal issues. So the Western Regional Panel has a coastal committee. That coastal committee meets by phone twice a month to do exactly the same thing that you're suggesting. What I would like to see is us be a little more proactive and have a meeting so that we could begin a conversation about how do we do these things and what are the steps that we need to employ to do coordination of this scale up and down the West Coast. And so we are thinking about it, and serendipitously, this dock landed on the beach at about the same time that we were planning a workshop to have the conversation that you were suggesting. And obviously, this takes precedence because it is a real issue. But so I would like to invite some of you, any of you, perhaps, to send me your email, and we can continue the conversation online or by phone to make that happen. And Robin Draham has been instrumental in trying to get a workshop together, but what we need is enough money to bring people together in one location. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
A little bit more context on that. The Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force, which I mentioned earlier, was authorized in 1996, 90 and 96, has never been reauthorized, has a limited amount of funds that are appropriated. The funds are administered through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to the panels and to the states for the implementation of their federally approved aquatic nuisance species management plan. So there is an infrastructure here with outdated legislation and with not a refresh on the funding. So we do have some challenges there. But I think it's important to point that there is an infrastructure, and we're trying to build on that infrastructure that's already well established through the Western Regional Panel.
I'm just going to tag on to that. I think this is a really good time because the Western Regional Panel is dealing very heavily with dry-scented mussel issues, and standardizing, monitoring, communication, response among the Western states is very much part of the effort that is happening. In fact, there's a meeting in Phoenix in August to bring state AGs and invasive species coordinators together to try to tackle this issue. A little bit more from a regulatory standpoint, but I think it sets the stage really nicely for future work, especially on marine issues.
Any other questions? Yes, Gail?
Just a quick suggestion. You know, when you call in and you report something, I've provided lists of things. I never get a response back. I don't even know if they get my list. So I'd like each of you who has one of those lines to have a little thing that calls back and says, thank you very much for your information. We will look into it or something so that people know that the message gets through. Because otherwise, you think you're calling a dead line, you know, often. So just a suggestion.
Thanks. Question?
I had a question about the decision to bury the biofouling debris from the dock, how that came about. I noticed in the photograph that there was water at the bottom of the trough, and so it looks like it's got a water table connection to the ocean. Because concerned with microbes, perhaps that's not as isolated as intended.
And I'll ask Steve to respond to that more specifically, but my understanding is it was well above the high tide line. I think that was from, everything was put in trash bags, and so there's water associated with the debris.
Yeah, if I can answer as well, our highest priority was to get it off land and into a terrestrial environment. And so we talked with state parks about doing that, and that was not feasible from their perspective. So it was taken to the high, way above high tide, dug down, as you properly identified, down to water table about 12 feet or so. We didn't have any place where we could get to that was completely terrestrial and dig a hole like that. There were concerns about a screen and distances traveled through trucks and all kind of stuff. So that was our best
There's
I understand the practical issue, but maybe it's not the best.
And one of the last questions in my presentation is, what is the right disposal method? That is something that this group could address, and logistics is going to reign in the field, but ideally, what can we do? What should we do? And if we can meet those ideals, great. And then, best efforts as we can in the field. But it would be great to identify that for things like the dock itself as well as the biological material. That'd be great guidance from this group.
Craig?
Yeah, I would be interested to know about response and what triggers a response. Each of the panelists, each of the states and provinces commented about a reporting mechanism, which is great. But then what happens? And if you take zebra and quagga mussels off the table, what triggers a response? Is there a decision-tree or mechanism already in place that's being used?
So in Canada, it was the fear of a ferocious fish that triggered the response.
So fear.
Pretty much. It was being hammered by the media that, you have this high-risk invader in a urban pond that drains ultimately to the Fraser, which supplies, a huge salmon stock. What are we doing about it? I mean, it was fear. I mean, we went to our plans after, but it wasn't the plan that said, now and in fact, we spent probably about 2 hours phoning each other over who's actually authorizing the response.
So there's not a set of criteria other than there's pressure and fear.
That's right, because we sort of thought that we were doing it. Our slow measured response was develop the ability to receive reports. We hadn't got to the point where we actually had to action the report.
Note to committees.
We're working on that now.
Any other responses? Yes, sure. Susan?
I think one of the challenges to that is the cost of response. So if we get a call or an email, we respond in air quotes to everything. There is a callback. There is a discussion with the person who called in. And we'll have somebody from one of our regional or our local offices go and look at an area if they think that there's something that's problematic. But I can say, as far as funding for control or eradication, there just really isn't any, and that takes a longer time. So it's a opposite of rapid response. We do have a decision tree in our, slow response. We have a decision tree for that in our management plan. But we really, case by case, just look at it and see, is there an opportunity to do something? Is it important to do something? So that's where that is in California.
And just related to Japan's tsunami marine debris and invasive species, what we're doing right now is the reports that come in through beach debris at state.or.us, which is our centralized reporting and response email. We have that automatically being funneled to ODFW, and we're looking at those reports and anything that we can discount as unimportant, and we're doing so. Unimportant here is things that don't have biofouling or things that appear to be 100% LEPIS biofouling. And to my knowledge, nothing else has come in through that line. But the second component of that is that the messaging we're putting out is, if you can pick it up and put it in a landfill disposal site, do that. So whether it has organisms on it or not, do that first. And that goes back to the dichotomy that I pointed out between the management response and the science response. One wants to get rid of it and one wants to sample it, and they're both important. The public isn't necessarily equipped with the information to make a best decision in the field. And so right now, until we get further guidance and a further plan, we're still messaging that disposal.
And Alan, But can I, I'll just add what I think. In our state, at least, we have a draft response plan that when we get a call, the first step in that process is to do an assessment. And we have a number of prohibited species that we are identified in state law. We have priority species that are high-risk species that are identified by the Washington Invasive Species Council. And so this first assessment is this a species we ought to be worried about? And then if it is a species we need to be worried about, the next step is to make an assignment to an agency that has jurisdiction for responding to that. And in the case of the marine debris, the invasive species stuff that showed up in Oregon, the Undaria is not listed as it's not listed as a priority species for the Washington Invasive Species Council, nor is any agency in our state responsible for responding to that particular macroalgae. And so I don't know what would happen in that circumstance. But also what drives our response is lack of money or lack of capacity, really. And with this problem, and if more and more of this stuff shows up on our beaches with more and more species on it, we don't have the capacity to respond in a reasonable and sane way. And Alan, who I am sitting up at the table for, is over there in the back. So,
Alan? Alan Playas from the Washington. Thanks, Ellen. I want to give an opportunity. We have a little bit more time, and I didn't ask them to be on the panel, but I know that there are some federal land managers here, and if there's one or two that want to speak to some of the activities they're doing within their lands, that would be great. Is there anyone? Yes. Can you introduce yourself?
Shauna Bautista, U.S. Forest Service. We have a little bit of coastline in California, which is what we call Region 5. It's a separate region. We have a little bit more in Oregon. I don't know if it's more or less, but a nice long stretch along the Oregon dunes. And some coastline, perhaps an Olympic National Forest in Washington, here and there. We have no small amount of coastline in southeast Alaska, approaching over 10,000 miles. But I'll let my colleague from Alaska who's here maybe speak to that. Our jurisdiction normally doesn't kick in till above the high tide line in our coastal areas, but we are concerned, very concerned about potential impacts of invasive species getting established and impacting the ecosystems that also impact the fish and wildlife resources that we manage. So we have concerns at this point right now. We're not sure what to do and have not formulated any specific responses. We have an aquatic invasive response for management strategy for our region here in the Oregon-Washington. But it didn't include marine organisms. It's a little unusual for us. We're not exactly sure, funding-wise or capacity-wise, what we'll be able to kick in. People management, access, those kinds of things are definitely going to kick in Oregon, perhaps if things wash up along the Oregon dunes and you have another, tourist attraction, that sort of thing will definitely be involved in those kinds of issues. Our ability to spend invasive species funds is generally linked to those issues that affect a, quote, forest or not. We have a forest health protection shop is where most of our invasive money is. And so our congressional authority to even spend any of that kind of money on a marine type situation is a question I have. That's something we need to look into. Certainly from an ecosystem standpoint, that's a concern. I can tell you that our individual forest budgets would not be able to handle a significant response issue to any great degree. So we do need to figure that out. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, and we have a couple other representatives here, one from the Siuslaw National Forest, and like I said, our representative in Alaska. So that's one thing I hope to get out of this workshop is, what can we do? How can we contribute? How can we be better prepared?
Great, thanks. Would any of your colleagues like to step up from Forest Service? Or,
I'm Mary Stenzel, I'm the regional botanist and invasive species coordinator for the Alaska region. And Sean was right in talking about that big shoreline. The Thomas Forest has about 10,000 miles of shoreline, and the Chugach Forest about 6,000 miles of shoreline in the Pacific Ocean. And there are some interesting surveys that have been done. There's one that just completed this early this summer in Yakutat, which is 80 miles of big white sand beaches, and they picked up 10,000 pounds of debris, and they do this every year. And last year was about 10,000 pounds of debris, but this year they had huge components of skyrockets and quite a few of big boats. But we're not very well organized in the region or as far as coordinating with the other agencies, and we really need to get going on that. So that's my area.
thank you. I think we have a representative from the National Park Service.
My name's Sarah Allen. I'm with the Pacific West Region of the National Park Service.
Thank you.
And I'm a point of contact now. Just last week, Rita Baird, who's
Thank you.
on the tsunami marine debris. But my counterpart, Taze Jones, is in Alaska, and they are monitoring in some of the coastal areas in Alaska, but challenged, as you pointed out, with just the length of shoreline. We have some response, and the effort is luckily joined with marine sanctuaries, which have been active partners with us in establishing some of these monitoring places. They're few and far between. I think we would like to augment that and increase it. Because we are national parks, we have visitor centers. It's a great point of contact where people can bring information in. So augmenting your response and reporting through our visitor centers is a good thing. We get several million visitors in some of these national parks. And we have monitoring also with the marine program, the PSU program, and all of our national parks on the Pacific West, which might be another way of tracking these species that are coming in. And citizen science program associated with that. So I'm looking for guidance from you, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. Great. And I believe there's a representative from the refuges, Fish and Wildlife refuges here. Sure.
I don't think there is, but Fish and Wildlife Ecological Services.
Okay. Sorry.
Fish and Wildlife with the monument on the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. They're
Great.
working with NOAA to do a response out there. Obviously, there's issues because there aren't people out there, and to go out there is really expensive. So they have to time their surveillance when they actually have expeditions planned on going out there. So it's one of those things where it's not, you don't know until you're there and you're seeing it. So the response is actually happening.
Great. And Robin?
I can talk to the Fish and Wildlife Service response. Region 1, which is Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii Pacific Islands, was on the docket. We realized that every single one of our refuge managers was calling NOAA individually, and that perhaps was not what all the marine debris and tsunami debris representatives wanted. And so we made a concerted effort to really coordinate both within Region 1 and now reaching out to Region 7 and 8 in terms of coordination. So we now finally have a really excellent phone tree for response. We have 2 designated points of contact within Region 1. Region 7 has a designated point of contact within the Fish and Wildlife Service. And we're working on Region 8, I believe. But that's been a huge help, and we now have a designated point of contact back in DC or headquarters, who's actually going to be the Department of Interior point of contact. Communication, developing those appropriate lines of communication was the huge hurdle that we had to overcome. Of course, we didn't know who was calling or listening in on the NOAA bi-weekly calls. We didn't know who was involved. But I can report that the refuges are really gearing up and doing some great work in Oregon. Refuges has been working along with BLM, Forest Service, and some of the state agencies, parks to develop some response protocols. These are on-the-ground protocols. In Washington and Oregon, we have the endangered snowy plover, which has habitat right in the prime debris washing up zone. So having to deal with the huge amount of additional tourism associated with tsunami debris, as well as with perhaps overzealous debris, beachcombers who might be going through plover habitat. There were a lot of those issues that we needed a response plan for, and that has just been developed. And one of the things they responded to, which sort of as a mock-up, was this leaking barrel of unknown chemical substance that was sort of reported off the coast. A lot of the refuge lands in Oregon, Washington, and Alaska are the rocky offshore islands, which are almost completely inaccessible and have really important sensitive habitat. So that's sort of the first step there. I will note, to help Tammy out, though, I did learn last week that the state of Alaska is going to use some shore coastline flyovers looking for debris. So there is some great work there. We're actually hoping to learn from how that goes in order to sort of help use some monitoring of those outer coast rocky shoreline areas.
Great. Thanks, Robin. And I can't forget the National Marine Sanctuaries Program. I know Liam is here, and is Steve. I don't know if you wanted to speak about the 2 sanctuaries.
We're doing a lot of collaboration
Thanks, Liam. Steve?
California, I just wanted to echo what Susan mentioned earlier, that we have multiple resources that are already out doing some kind of monitoring, either with speech combing, looking for dead birds, and oil spill response, rock intertidal monitoring, and even we have some subtidal work you're mentioning. We are actually looking for subtidal invasive species. But nothing geared specifically towards the marine debris invasive species issue. So I'm looking forward to taking this information back and disseminating it to those groups and hopefully providing them with material that they can add on to the docket so that we're using the tools that are already in place and taking advantage of that, whether it's academics, state federal partnerships, or any of the NGOs that are doing that. So we do have lots of assets in place, we just have to make the best use of them.
Great, thanks, Steve. Did I miss any other, oh, yes. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Nancy Deshu, and I'm with the Department of Interior. I'm with what's now called the Bureau of Ocean Energy, which is a small section of the Department of Interior that deals with the research and environmental assessment on the outer continental shelf from 3 miles out to 200 miles. So there's no direct nexus here, although I'm connected through the invasive species community, and I've been with this agency for years and former Park Service for 20 years, so whoever's I recognize you. So the nexus here is I'm on the Department of Interior Invasive Species Committee, where there's conference calls every month, and then also I'm with Tammy and Linda and Gary here. There's other Alaskans that list that we're on Alaska Interagency Invasive Species conference calls and have an annual conference. So the nexus for the Department of Interior, I would say, are three. And one is, of course, marine hazards. The agency is not directly responsible for that, but we have a lot of shipping going on and rigs moving around. There's always that hazard. There's also the hazard in Cook Inlet, which is really state oil and gas, so I don't mean to step on Tammy's toes here, but the velocities in there are quite great. The currents are quite great. It's a glacial fed area, and debris moving in there that wedges up against the rigs is a danger, and that's happened before. And we do have some debris at the south end of Cook Inlet. We don't know where it's coming from. There's quite a large piece right down there now. I'd say the invasive species risk is of great concern, and Tammy's expert on that in Alaska, because most of it's happening in southeast, and I'm working in south central and up into the Arctic. But the concern there, from my perspective, is subsistence. And I've heard very little about this while this meeting went on this morning. But the cultural values, the tribes, I don't know how they're represented here, but the effects on subsistence lifeways is potentially great, especially in southeast Alaska. But so OCS is from 3 miles out to 200 miles, and you'd say, well, what is that nexus? And I hear some of my federal colleagues saying, well, high tideline and whatnot. But I encourage you all to break that jurisdictional mentality down in some ways, because the sea is meeting there, and although OCS is 3 miles out, if that invasive species comes to the coast, and there's a coastal community there that is potentially affected by oil and gas, mining, debris, and all these things that they all have to be considered in an environmental assessment. And in terms of cumulative impacts, this could be the one thing that tips, especially for a subsistence community that's already stressed out. And we look back at things like the oil spill, and that's a perfect example. Maybe there were small things going on, and then one more thing comes on. So I encourage you to try to think about the cumulative impacts, but keep in mind, and I know not all the states have subsistence concerns as Alaska does, but for Alaska, it's a very big concern, especially in terms of invasive species. So maybe Tammy at some time will be able to talk to you in breakout sessions about some of the invasive species we have and tunicate problems in southeast Alaska. Not that that's related to the tsunami debris immediately, but that would be a type of pressing concern.
Okay, thank you. We have filled this morning session. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the panelists. You guys did a great job. I'm sorry for the short notice, but I thought it was a great opportunity to hear what's going on in each of the jurisdictions. We're going to break now for an hour and a half. We do have lunch materials for the volunteers, but it's generally lunch on your own, as you saw on the agenda for today and tomorrow. So we built in a little extra time for you folks to do that. We're going to return here to this room at 2 p.m. And what you'll hear right at the start of the afternoon session is a discussion about the 2 work groups and the results of the 2 work groups. And so that's to set the stage for your breakout groups, which is this afternoon. So please be back here promptly at 2, and we'll start up immediately and talk about the management protocol and the communications framework. And if there's any other announcements, Robin, did you want to direct folks in general? Robin, is there Thank you very much.